Victoria Ashford's champagne glass struck the marble podium with enough force to crack the rim. The sound echoed through the Newark Grand Hotel ballroom like a gunshot, silencing 200 guests mid-conversation. Crystal shards scattered across the stage, catching the chandelier light in tiny explosions of white and gold. She didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge the mess, just straightened her shoulders and adjusted the microphone with fingers that never trembled in public. The G800 sat behind her on the projected screen. $90 million of American aerospace engineering rendered in sleek titanium and composite materials. Her father had built Ashford Aviation from a single hangar in 1962. She'd turned it into a $2 billion empire. Tonight was supposed to cement that legacy with a Dubai contract announcement. The kind of deal that made Fortune covers and secured another decade of dominance. Instead, she was staring at a janitor. Garrett Holloway had been trying to reach the service exit when his cleaning cart clipped a waiter's elbow. The champagne tray went airborne in slow motion, 6 glasses of Dom Perignon arcing through the air like tiny comets before detonating across the Italian marble floor. The crash pulled every head in the room toward the back corner, where a man in a gray maintenance uniform stood frozen, mop in hand, surrounded by spreading pools of $1,500 alcohol. Victoria's voice cut through the stunned silence with the precision of a scalpel. "Get that man out of my sight." The words carried across the ballroom on the sound system, amplified and inescapable. Camera phones rose like a field of digital fireflies. Someone laughed, then another. Within seconds, the entire room was watching a viral moment being born in real time. Security materialized from the shadows, 2 men in dark suits moving with practiced efficiency. Garrett's weathered hands tightened on the mop handle, but he didn't resist, just kept his eyes down, the way he'd learned to do over 7 years of being invisible. His steel-toed boots left wet tracks across the floor as they escorted him toward the service corridor. Behind him, Victoria had already returned to her speech, voice smooth and controlled as if the interruption had never happened. The G800 specifications scrolled across the screen. Range: 7,500 nautical miles. Speed: Mach 0.925. Passenger capacity: 19 in luxury configuration. The pinnacle of private aviation, she called it. Proof that American innovation still dominated the skies. Garrett heard none of it. The service door closed behind him with a hydraulic hiss, cutting off the applause and leaving him alone in the fluorescent-lit maintenance corridor. His shift didn't end for another 2 hours. The cart needed restocking. The lobby restroom still needed attention before the gala guests started filtering out around midnight. He pushed the cart toward the supply closet, muscles moving through the familiar routine, while his mind stayed carefully blank. 7 years of practice had made him excellent at not thinking about who he used to be, not remembering the weight of a wrench in his hand or the sound of a perfectly tuned turbine engine, or the way Marcus Sullivan used to joke that they could rebuild a C-130 blindfolded if they had to. The phone in his pocket buzzed. He didn't need to check it to know what the message would say. Iris's continuous glucose monitor sent alerts every time her blood sugar drifted outside the safe zone. Too high meant ketoacidosis risk. Too low meant seizure risk. Both meant hospital bills he couldn't afford, and a daughter who tried too hard to pretend she wasn't scared. His hands were soap raw and shaking slightly when he finally pulled out the phone. The screen showed 162 milligrams per deciliter. High, but manageable. She'd need extra insulin before bed, which meant burning through the vial faster than insurance would cover for another week. The math lived in his head like a second language now. Rent, utilities, insulin, pump supplies, test strips, the prescription copays that somehow never stopped climbing. His janitor salary covered maybe 70% of it on good months. The rest came from skipped meals and a credit card he'd stopped checking the balance on because the numbers only moved in one direction. Caroline used to handle the medical logistics. She'd had a system, color-coded charts and reminder apps, and a way of talking to insurance companies that somehow got them to say yes when they'd already said no 3 times. Then she'd taken Iris to the grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon in March, and a drunk driver had jumped the median on Route 21. And Garrett had spent 7 years trying to figure out how to be 2 parents in one body, while everything he'd ever been good at turned to ash in his hands. The crowd noise from the ballroom shifted pitch suddenly, excited murmurs rising into something sharper. Garrett heard it through the walls, that particular frequency of controlled panic that meant something had gone wrong in a very public way. He knew he should stay in the service corridor, should finish his shift and go home and check Iris's blood sugar again and pack her lunch for tomorrow with a note on the napkin because she still kept every single one in a shoebox under her bed. Instead, he found himself walking back toward the ballroom, pulled by instinct he'd spent 7 years trying to kill. The emergency announcement came through on someone's phone first, then spread like contagion through the crowd. Ashford G800, emergency landing, Newark Liberty, hydraulic failure, all landing gear stuck in retracted position. Victoria's face had gone white, but her voice stayed level as she spoke into her cell phone, already coordinating with the tower and maintenance and the FAA inspector who'd been scheduled to tour the aircraft tomorrow morning. The Dubai representatives were conferring in rapid Arabic near the bar. Board members clustered around Victoria like defensive linemen, their expressions calculating the stock price impact in real time. Garrett pushed through the service door and kept walking. No one stopped him this time. Every eye in the room was locked on the live news feed someone had pulled up on the projection screen. The G800 circled Newark Liberty's airspace at 8,000 feet, burning fuel, buying time for a solution no one seemed to have. The camera caught it in profile against the sodium lights of the runway. Sleek and deadly serious, twin Rolls-Royce engines still running clean, the fuselage showing no external damage. Just the landing gear tucked tight into the belly where it was supposed to retract after takeoff, but never supposed to stay. Victoria's voice cut through the chaos with the kind of authority that came from never allowing panic to show. "Get me Marcus de Leon on the line. I don't care if he's sleeping. And someone find out why the backup hydraulic system isn't responding." Garrett's hands had already curled into fists, the old muscle memory rising up through 7 years of deliberate forgetting. Marcus de Leon would tell her the same thing any competent engineer would say. The backup system ran through the same manifold as the primary. If the main hydraulic accumulator had failed closed, the backup was just wishful thinking. And if the pressure relief valve had been installed backwards like he'd seen happen on 3 separate occasions during his Air Force years, then the whole system was probably bleeding pressure into the wrong reservoir and there wasn't enough hydraulic fluid left in the circuit to move anything heavier than a coffee cup. He knew all this the way he knew his daughter's insulin dosage, the way he still knew the torque specifications for every bolt on a C-130 cargo ramp, even though he hadn't touched one since Marcus Sullivan died screaming in a cockpit. Garrett should have caught the maintenance error on before they ever took off. The news feed showed emergency vehicles staging along the runway, foam trucks, ambulances, fire suppression units that looked like something from a science fiction movie. The G800 had 200,000 pounds of kinetic energy that was going to meet the runway one way or another in the next 40 minutes. The only question was whether it would be a landing or a crash. Garrett was already moving toward the exit when Victoria's assistant materialized in front of him. Younger than Iris, but with the kind of expensive education that showed in her posture. "You need to leave." Ms. Ashford was very clear. He stepped around her without breaking stride. The ballroom doors led to the main lobby. The lobby led to the parking garage. The parking garage led to Route 21. And Route 21 led to Newark Liberty in 12 minutes if he ignored the speed limit and every traffic light between here and the airport perimeter. His toolbox was in the trunk of his 15-year-old Civic, where it had been gathering dust for 7 years. Carolyn had wanted him to throw it away, sell it, donate it, anything to stop the reminder of who he used to be staring at him every time he loaded groceries. He'd never been able to explain why he kept it. The same reason he still had his Air Force maintenance certification even though it had expired in 2009. The same reason he knew exactly which hangar the Ashford fleet used for service work, even though he'd never once set foot inside it during his years mopping floors in the civilian terminal. The Civic's engine turned over on the third try, burning oil and making a noise the mechanic kept saying would cost $800 to fix. Garrett had been saying he'd get to it for 9 months. The check engine light had become just another fixture on the dashboard, as permanent as the speedometer. Newark Liberty's South Service Gate was supposed to be restricted access only. The security guard was supposed to check credentials and call for authorization and follow a protocol that existed specifically to prevent random civilians from driving onto active taxiways. But Garrett still had his old Air Force ID in his wallet, the one that said Aircraft Maintenance Chief, and showed a photograph from 2003 when his hair was darker and his eyes hadn't learned to look at the ground yet. The guard saw the ID, saw the toolbox in the back seat, made a decision in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Hangar 7. They've got the whole emergency response staging there. The Civic's headlights cut through the darkness between terminal buildings, past dormant aircraft and fuel trucks and all the machinery that kept modern aviation running. Garrett's hands were steady on the wheel, but his chest felt like someone had replaced his lungs with concrete. He hadn't been inside a maintenance hangar in 7 years, hadn't looked at an aircraft schematic or touched a hydraulic line, or done anything that resembled the work that used to define him back when he was a person, instead of just a collection of mistakes wrapped in a janitor's uniform. The G800 was still circling overhead, visible through the windshield as a string of navigation lights against the black sky. 43 minutes of fuel remaining according to the radio chatter bleeding through the emergency frequencies. 43 minutes to figure out how to deploy landing gear that every engineer at Ashford Aviation apparently couldn't fix from the ground. Hangar 7 blazed with light like a cathedral. The massive doors rolled open to reveal the staging area inside. A crowd had gathered, maybe 50 people, maintenance crews and engineers and management types in suits that cost more than Garrett made in a month. They clustered around a projection of the G800's hydraulic schematic, while someone's voice came through on speakerphone explaining why the manual override wasn't responding, and why the emergency blowdown system wasn't pressurizing, and why they were approximately 38 minutes away from watching $90 million of aerospace engineering turn into scrap metal and a media disaster. Nobody stopped him when he walked in. Nobody asked for credentials or authorization or any of the things they should have demanded from a stranger carrying a toolbox that had last been opened when the world made sense and the future still held possibilities beyond insulin pumps and unpaid medical bills. The hydraulic schematic glowed on the screen 10 feet tall. Garrett saw the problem in the time it took his eyes to track from the main accumulator to the pressure relief valve to the backup circuit that should have been isolated but clearly wasn't. Someone had installed the relief valve backwards. The arrow was pointing the wrong direction in the diagram, which meant it was probably pointing the wrong direction in the actual aircraft, which meant every pound of hydraulic pressure was bleeding into the return line instead of the actuators, and the landing gear wasn't coming down until someone physically reversed that valve or the plane ran out of fuel and fell out of the sky. His voice came out rough from disuse and 7 years of learning to stay quiet. "I can fix it." Every head in the hangar turned. 50 pairs of eyes locked onto the janitor with the gray uniform and the rusty toolbox, and the absolute certainty in his voice that came from 27 years of knowing exactly how aircraft broke and exactly how to make them whole again. The maintenance chief looked like someone had asked him to solve a calculus problem in ancient Greek. His Ashford aviation polo shirt was dark with sweat under the arms, despite the hangar's climate control. He'd been standing at that schematic for 40 minutes, watching his career dissolve in real time, and now some random janitor was claiming to have the answer he'd missed. "Who the hell are you?" Garrett set the toolbox down with a metallic thunk that echoed off the hangar walls. The sound was familiar in a way that made his chest ache. Metal on concrete, the percussion of real work being done by hands that remembered how. Someone who knows the pressure relief valve is installed backwards. Starboard hydraulic manifold, just aft of the main accumulator. You can see it right there in the schematic if you know what you're looking for. He pointed at the screen with fingers that had steadied the moment he started talking about aircraft systems instead of his own life. The valve symbol sat there in green and white, arrow pointing in a direction that would have been correct on 70% of aircraft models, but was catastrophically wrong on the G800's custom hydraulic configuration. The chief squinted at the schematic, then back at Garrett, then at the toolbox with its peeling Air Force decal and the name Holloway stenciled on the side in letters that had faded to ghosts. Your maintenance? Used to be. 27 years. C-100s mostly. Some C-17s worked toward the end. Seen this exact problem on a Hercules out of Ramstein in 2004. Mechanic installed the valve during a manifold rebuild. Didn't check the flow direction because the housing threads either way. System bled pressure into the return line for 3 days before anyone noticed the landing gear was taking 20 seconds longer to cycle than spec allowed. The explanation came out in the technical shorthand that used to be his native language. Back when he could spend 8 hours elbow deep in hydraulic systems and emerge with solutions in his hands and satisfaction in his chest. The chief was nodding now, seeing it, the way the backwards valve would create a pressure sink that looked normal on static tests but failed catastrophically under load. 34 minutes of fuel remaining. The voice came from somewhere behind the crowd, flat and empty, the way numbers always sounded when they represented the distance between now and disaster. Garrett didn't turn to see who'd spoken, just grabbed his toolbox and started walking toward the G800 service platform that sat ready for the emergency landing they were all pretending might still happen cleanly. The hangar had that particular smell of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid and industrial solvent that triggered memories faster than photographs ever could. His boots hit the platform steps with familiar rhythm, muscle memory guiding him up toward the maintenance access panel on the G800's starboard side, while his conscious mind was still catching up to the fact that he was doing this, actually doing this. Touching an aircraft again after 7 years of keeping his hands occupied with mops and trash bags and anything that didn't remind him of who he used to be. The access panel required a specific key. Garrett had it on his old key ring, still in his pocket after all these years because he'd never been able to make himself throw away the tools that defined him even after they stopped being useful. The panel swung open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing the hydraulic bay in all its color-coded complexity. Blue lines for main system pressure, red for backup, yellow for emergency blowdown, green for return flow. And there it was, the pressure relief valve sitting exactly where the schematic said it would be, arrow etched into the housing, pointing directly toward the return manifold instead of away from it. Backwards. Someone had climbed up behind him on the platform. Garrett felt the presence without looking, too focused on the valve housing to spare attention for anything else. His hands were already moving, selecting the correct socket from his toolbox with the automatic precision that came from 10,000 repetitions over 3 decades. 3/4 inch, 12-point, because Ashford used European suppliers, and European suppliers loved their metric fasteners converted to the nearest imperial size that still required special tooling. The first bolt loosened with a crack that meant it had been over-torqued during installation. Someone had cranked it down past spec, probably trying to make sure it didn't leak, not understanding that over-torquing created stress fractures that made leaks more likely over time. Garrett's hands adjusted automatically, feeling the resistance, knowing exactly how much force to apply before the threads gave up their grip. "You really think this will work?" Victoria Ashford's voice. Garrett had heard it enough times over 7 years of being invisible at the airport to recognize the particular frequency of it, that combination of boarding school diction and corporate command that made every sentence sound like a decision being handed down from on high. But there was something else underneath it now, something that sounded almost like hope, wearing the disguise of skepticism. If the valve's backwards, reversing it should restore pressure to the main circuit. Landing gear actuators need 1500 psi to overcome the mechanical locks. System should be able to deliver that once the pressure stops bleeding into the return line. He didn't look at her, couldn't afford the distraction. The second bolt was fighting him, cross-threaded by whatever mechanic had installed this manifold during the G800's final assembly. Garrett adjusted his angle, felt for the sweet spot where the threads would align if he was patient enough, gentle enough, willing to let the metal tell him what it needed instead of forcing it. The bolt gave. Then the third, the fourth, 31 minutes. Someone else keeping count. Garrett's world had narrowed to the 6 inches of space between his hands and the valve housing. The old hydraulic fluid had that burnt smell that meant someone had been running the system hot, probably trying to troubleshoot the gear problem from the cockpit without understanding they were just making it worse. The valve came free in his hands with a sigh of escaping pressure, maybe 5 psi left in the line, barely enough to lift a gauge needle. He rotated it 180 degrees. The arrow now pointed away from the return manifold toward the distribution block where it should have been pointing all along. The reversal looked so simple, so obvious, the kind of fix that made people wonder how anyone could have missed it in the first place. But Garrett had seen this mistake before, had made it himself once, early in his career, back when he was too confident and not careful enough, and learning the hard way that aviation maintenance was a profession where attention to detail was the only thing standing between routine and catastrophe. The bolts went back in clean, threads aligning properly now that he was the one controlling the torque. 40 foot-pounds, according to spec. Garrett didn't need a torque wrench to hit that number within 5%. His hands knew the feel of it the way a pianist knew the pressure required for each key. The access panel sealed with the same pneumatic hiss it had made opening. Garrett stepped back, wiped his hands on a rag from his toolbox, and looked at Victoria Ashford for the first time since entering the hangar. She was smaller than he'd expected. Something about the way she commanded ballrooms and boardrooms had created an impression of physical size that didn't match the reality of someone barely 5'4" in expensive heels. Her hair had come partially loose from whatever architectural arrangement it had been in earlier, dark strands framing a face that was lined with the kind of stress that came from being responsible for everything and everyone all the time. Tell the pilot to cycle the landing gear 3 times. Full extension and retraction. System needs to clear the trapped air from the lines before it'll build full pressure. Victoria's phone was already in her hand, her thumb moving across the screen with the practiced efficiency of someone who lived half her life in digital communication. Garrett heard her voice shift into command mode, precise instructions delivered to whoever was on the other end, probably the pilot or the tower or both. The crowd in the hangar had grown. Word had spread that something was happening, that maybe the G800 wasn't going to become a fireball in a lawsuit after all. Garrett saw engineers he recognized from the civilian terminal, mechanics from other carriers, people who worked in the shadows of the aviation industry doing the unglamorous work that kept metal tubes flying safely through the sky. 28 minutes. The first landing gear cycle took 45 seconds. Garrett heard it through the hangar speakers, the hydraulic whine of actuators moving under load, the mechanical thunk of locks engaging. The pilot's voice came through tight with controlled fear, reading off the pressure gauge numbers like a prayer. 1200 psi, main gear showing down and locked. Nose gear still indicating retracted. Victoria's eyes found Garrett's across the platform. He could see the question there, the fear underneath the CEO mask she wore for the world. Nose gear actuator takes longer to pressurize. It's got the smallest bore and the longest hydraulic run from the manifold. Give it another cycle. The second cycle took 30 seconds. Hydraulic pressure climbing now. The system purging air and building the force needed to drive the landing gear against aerodynamic loads and mechanical resistance, and the simple physics of making heavy metal move in directions it didn't want to go. 1400 psi. Nose gear extending. Showing down. Locked. All 3 gear down and locked. We have 3 green lights. The hangar erupted. 50 people who'd been holding their breath for 40 minutes, suddenly releasing it all at once. The sound of catastrophe averted, and careers salvaged, and disaster transformed into just another story about the time something almost went wrong, but didn't. Someone started clapping. Then everyone was clapping. A wall of sound that made Garrett want to retreat back into the shadows where he'd spent the last 7 years being safely invisible. Victoria was climbing the platform steps, moving with purpose that scattered the maintenance crew like birds. She stopped 2 feet from Garrett, close enough that he could smell her perfume. Something expensive that probably had a French name and cost more than his monthly rent. "What's your name?" He'd been bracing for this moment since the valve came loose in his hands. The point where someone asked who he was, and he had to decide how much truth to tell. Garrett Holloway. Her eyes narrowed, recognition starting to form behind them like thunderheads building on a summer afternoon. "You work here. I've seen you. You're the janitor." "Yes, ma'am." Something shifted in her expression, confusion giving way to a kind of cold calculation that probably made board members wake up sweating in the middle of the night. "A janitor who knows G800 hydraulic systems better than my chief engineer. Used to be aircraft maintenance chief. 412th Test Wing, Air Force, retired in 2007. The word retired carried enough weight to sink ships. Victoria heard it, heard everything underneath it, all the things Garrett wasn't saying about how a 27-year career had ended and what kind of person went from running a maintenance crew on multi-million-dollar aircraft to pushing a mop in the same airport where he used to work. She paused, something flickering across her face that looked almost like recognition. My husband died in a plane crash 8 years ago. Private jet. Mechanical failure. They called it pilot error, but I never believed them. The admission hung in the air between them. Vulnerability wearing the disguise of corporate efficiency. My office. Tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. It wasn't a question. Victoria Ashford didn't ask questions when she could issue commands instead. She was already turning away, already moving to the next crisis or opportunity or whatever executives did when they weren't watching their company's flagship aircraft nearly crash on live news feeds. Garrett packed his tools with the careful precision that had been drilled into him during basic training 30 years ago. Every wrench in its place, every socket in order. The toolbox closed with a solid click that meant everything was secure. Everything was ready for the next job, even though there probably wouldn't be a next job because this was supposed to be the ending he'd been avoiding for 7 years, the moment where his old life tried to reach out and drag him back into all the failures he'd worked so hard to forget. The walk back to his Civic felt longer than it had any right to. The night air was cool and carried that particular smell of Newark in October, industrial and organic and faintly chemical all at once. His phone had accumulated 17 messages during the hour he'd spent inside the hangar. Most of them were from the building supervisor at the hotel asking where he'd gone and why his cleaning cart was abandoned in the service corridor and whether he understood that leaving a shift without authorization was grounds for immediate termination. One message was from Iris. Text only, sent 20 minutes ago. Dad, where are you? Blood sugar is 143. I did the correction bolus like you showed me. Are you coming home soon? I saved you dinner. Garrett sat in the Civic with the engine off and the phone in his hand, and something hot and sharp rising up in his chest that felt like all the tears he hadn't cried since Carolyn died trying to escape at once. His daughter was 11 years old and managing a chronic disease that could kill her if she made one mistake with her insulin calculations, and she'd saved him dinner, probably the chicken pasta she knew how to make from watching him cook it 50 times. He typed back with thumbs that had started shaking again now that the adrenaline was wearing off and the reality of what he'd just done was setting in. On my way home now. 20 minutes. Did you eat enough? Her response came back in seconds. Yes, I saw you on the news. Channel 7. They showed the plane landing safe. Was that you? Did you fix it? The video was already viral by the time Garrett checked his social media feeds. Someone had recorded the whole thing on their phone. The crowd in the hangar, Victoria climbing the platform. The moment the pilot's voice came through the speakers announcing 3 green lights. The angle was bad and the lighting was worse, but there was no mistaking the figure in the gray janitor uniform with his hands deep in the G800's hydraulic bay. The comments section was already a war zone. Half the people were calling him a hero. The other half were demanding to know why Ashford Aviation had to rely on a janitor to fix critical safety systems. Someone had already dug up his service record, the honorable discharge that got changed to dishonorable in 2007 for reasons the official paperwork never quite explained. The usual internet detectives were calling it suspicious, demanding investigations, building conspiracy theories out of data points that didn't connect to anything except their own need to turn everything into a narrative with villains and victims and dramatic revelations. Garrett closed the browser and started the Civic. The engine caught on the first try this time, as if the universe had decided to throw him one small mercy after an evening of disasters narrowly averted. Route 21 was empty this late, just him and the occasional truck hauling cargo that needed to move at night when day shift America was sleeping. His apartment was dark except for the living room lamp Iris always left on when he worked late. She was curled on the couch in her pajamas, the ones with the stars that were getting too small, but she refused to give up. Her glucose monitor showed 128 on the display, solidly in range, proof that she'd handled everything correctly, even though she shouldn't have to be handling it at all at 11 years old. She opened her eyes when he came through the door. That instant alertness that came from years of her body teaching her that sleep was a luxury that had to be balanced against the constant vigilance diabetes demanded. "You fixed the plane. It wasn't a question." Iris had the same tone her mother used to use when she'd already figured out the answer and was just waiting for Garrett to confirm what she already knew. "Yeah, just a valve installed wrong. Simple fix once you knew what to look for." She sat up, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders like a cape. "The news said you're a hero. They said you saved all those people on the plane. I just did what needed doing. Same as any mechanic would have done if they'd seen the problem." Iris gave him the look that meant she thought he was being deliberately dense, the expression Carolyn used to deploy when Garrett was downplaying something that deserved proper recognition. "Dad, you fixed something really important. You should be proud." The words sat in the air between them like a challenge Garrett wasn't sure how to answer. Pride had become a complicated concept somewhere between Marcus Sullivan's funeral and Caroline's diagnosis, and the 7 years of invisible work that followed. He'd spent so long making himself small and forgettable that the idea of being proud of anything felt dangerous, like opening a door that led to rooms full of memories he'd spent years learning not to enter. "I'm going to have a meeting tomorrow with the CEO. She wants to talk about what happened tonight." Iris's eyes got wide, that particular combination of excitement and worry that came from being 11 and smart enough to know that big changes could be good or bad, but were always scary. "What are you going to tell her?" Garrett hung his jacket on the hook by the door, bought himself time by going through the familiar motions of coming home. His toolbox went in the hall closet where it had lived for 7 years, metal and memory wrapped in canvas and stored in darkness. "I don't know yet, but whatever happens, you're going to be okay. I promise." The promise felt hollow even as he said it. He'd made the same promise to Caroline when the cancer diagnosis came back stage 4 and the oncologist started talking about experimental treatments and managing expectations. He'd promised she'd be okay right up until the moment she stopped breathing, and the monitors went flat, and okay became a word that had no meaning anymore. Iris hugged him hard enough to make his ribs ache. Her head tucked under his chin the way it had been since she was small enough to fit in the crook of his arm. "I'm proud of you, Dad, even if you won't be proud of yourself." She went to bed after that, padding down the hall to her room with the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling and the shoebox full of lunch notes under the bed and all the medical supplies that turned childhood into a carefully calculated balance between carbohydrates and insulin and blood glucose numbers that could kill you if you got the math wrong. Garrett sat alone in the living room with the TV muted on the late news. They were still running the story, footage of the G800 landing smooth as silk on runway 22L. The emergency vehicles standing down, the crisis averted. The anchor was calling it a miracle, calling Garrett's intervention heroic, calling for investigations into how Ashford Aviation's quality control had missed such a fundamental error. His phone buzzed with a new message. Unknown number, sent at 11:47 p.m. Mr. Holloway, Victoria, Ashford. I've been reviewing your employment records. We need to discuss more than just tomorrow's meeting. There are questions about your service discharge that deserve answers. Questions I intend to ask. 9 a.m., my office. Don't be late. The message carried the same command tone as her voice, words arranged like orders instead of requests. Garrett read it 3 times, trying to decode the subtext underneath the corporate speak, trying to understand what kind of trouble he'd just walked into by doing the one thing he swore he'd never do again. His reflection stared back from the blank TV screen. A 58-year-old man in a janitor's uniform who'd spent 7 years learning to be nobody and had just reminded the world that he used to be somebody, back when that still mattered. The insurance bill for Iris's insulin pump supplies sat on the coffee table where he'd left it that morning. Past due, second notice. The numbers hadn't changed just because he'd fixed a $90 million aircraft. The rent was still due in 12 days. The credit card was still maxed. The future was still the same careful balancing act between making enough to survive and not drowning in all the ways life found to cost more than he could afford. But somewhere in the back of his mind, in the part that still remembered what it felt like to solve problems with his hands instead of running from them, something had shifted. The toolbox was back in the closet, but it didn't feel as heavy as it had that morning. The memories were still there, Marcus and Caroline and all the failures that came after, but they'd been joined by something new. The feeling of landing gear cycling through 3 perfect extensions, the sound of hydraulic pressure climbing back to spec, the simple satisfaction of fixing something that was broken and making it right again. Garrett turned off the lamp and sat in darkness, listening to Iris's glucose monitor beep softly from her bedroom, counting down the hours until 9 a.m. and whatever Victoria Ashford's questions were going to cost him. The search results appeared on Garrett's laptop screen at 2:47 a.m., sleep long abandoned in favor of research he should have done years ago. Michael Ashford, pilot error blamed in 2016. Crash, the article was from the National Transportation Safety Board archives. Private Cessna citation, departure from Teterboro. En route to Martha's Vineyard. Loss of hydraulic pressure at 10,000 feet. Emergency landing attempted. Aircraft struck trees on approach. Pilot deceased. Sole occupant. The investigation conclusion sat there in bureaucratic language that felt familiar in the worst way. Pilot failed to respond appropriately to hydraulic warning indicators. Continued flight despite clear system malfunction. Contributing factor, poor decision-making under stress. Garrett clicked through to the technical appendix. The hydraulic failure analysis made his chest tight. Port side manifold, pressure relief valve, system degradation under load. Exactly like Marcus Sullivan's crash. Exactly like the G800 he'd fixed 6 hours ago. He pulled up image searches for Michael Ashford. Found a man in his early 40s, good-looking in the way people with money always manage to be, standing next to Victoria at various charity events. The photographs showed progression over years, engagement photo, wedding, company milestones. In every image, Victoria smiled with the kind of happiness that came from believing the future was secure. The last photo was dated 3 weeks before the crash. Michael and Victoria at some gala. her hand on her stomach in that unconscious gesture pregnant women made. The caption identified her as 8 months expecting first child. Garrett closed the laptop and sat in darkness, thinking about hydraulic valves and dead pilots, and the particular way grief changed a person's face over 8 years. His alarm went off at 5:30, the usual time. He made Iris's lunch on autopilot, chicken sandwich with no crust, apple slices, juice box, and today's note on the napkin. Courage is just fear that prayed. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair wild from sleep, monitor reading 104. Big day, huh? Just a meeting. Iris gave him the look that meant she knew he was understating things but was going to let him get away with it. Are you going to take the job if she offers it? I don't know that she's offering a job. Dad, she called you at midnight. That's either a job offer or she's in love with you. And I'm pretty sure billionaire CEOs don't fall in love with janitors in the same day they meet them. The observation was delivered with the particular certainty 11-year-olds deployed when they'd figured out something adults were pretending not to see. Eat your breakfast. You've got a math test today. Don't change the subject. Eat your breakfast. She did, but the smile on her face said she'd won the argument even if he wouldn't admit it. Ashford Aviation Headquarters looked different in daylight. Less intimidating, more ordinary, just another glass tower in Newark's corporate district trying to pretend it was Manhattan. Garrett parked 3 blocks away because he couldn't afford garage rates and walked in wearing the same khakis and button-down shirt he wore to parent-teacher conferences. The clothes felt wrong, costume pieces from a life that didn't quite fit anymore. The elevator to the 18th floor was empty except for him and a woman in a suit that probably cost what he made in 2 months. She looked at him the way people in expensive clothes always looked at people in cheap ones, a glance that assessed and dismissed in the same motion. The reception area outside Victoria's office was designed to intimidate, floor-to-ceiling windows, furniture that looked like sculpture, art on the walls that Garrett suspected was either priceless or worthless depending on who you asked. The receptionist had the kind of beauty that came from extensive maintenance and smiled with teeth too white to be natural. Mr. Holloway, Ms. Ashford is expecting you. She led him through mahogany doors into an office that occupied the entire corner of the building. Victoria stood at the windows, phone to her ear, her free hand gesturing in tight, controlled movements that suggested the conversation wasn't going well. She turned when he entered, ended the call mid-sentence without explanation. Mr. Holloway, punctual. I appreciate that. Her office could have fit his entire apartment twice over. The desk was larger than most people's dining tables. A photograph sat on the credenza, Victoria and Michael Ashford, smiling like people who'd never been touched by tragedy. Garrett stayed standing, hands in pockets, feeling like an intruder in a museum. Please, sit. He took the chair across from her desk, leather that probably cost more than his car. Victoria settled into her own chair with the controlled grace that came from decades of projecting authority through posture alone. I spent most of the night reading your file. Aircraft Maintenance Chief, 412th Test Wing. Spotless record for 26 years. Then, in 2007, your discharge status changed from honorable to dishonorable. Care to explain why? The question was direct, clinical, the tone of someone conducting an interview rather than a conversation. Garrett had been bracing for this since her midnight text. My partner died during a test flight, C-130 out of Ramstein Air Base. The inquiry board ruled it was my fault. Negligent maintenance. Failure to catch a defective hydraulic valve during pre-flight inspection. Was it your fault? No, ma'am. The valve was installed backwards during a manifold rebuild 2 weeks prior. I wasn't the mechanic who did the work, but someone needed to take the blame, and a maintenance chief makes a better scapegoat than admitting the Air Force had been using a supplier with systemic quality problems. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. The supplier was Baxter Components. It wasn't a question. Garrett nodded anyway. Same company we've been using since 2008. She opened a manila folder, spread documents across the desk with the precision of a prosecutor laying out evidence. I started reviewing our maintenance records after you left last night. 7 aircraft over the past decade, all with hydraulic anomalies. Nothing catastrophic until Tuesday, but enough incidents that someone should have noticed a pattern. Someone did notice. My quality control director flagged it 18 months ago, recommended fleet-wide inspection of all Baxter-installed components. Garrett picked up one of the reports, scanned technical language that confirmed what he already suspected. Let me guess. The board overruled the recommendation. Too expensive. Too disruptive to production schedules. We were in the middle of Dubai contract negotiations. Any hint of safety issues would have killed the deal. She said it flatly, like reading a medical examiner's report on her own company's ethics. And your husband's crash? Victoria pulled another file, this one thinner, pages worn from repeated handling. Official cause was pilot error. Michael ignored hydraulic warnings, continued flight despite system degradation. The NTSB concluded he made poor decisions under pressure. But you don't believe that. Michael was paranoid about mechanical issues. He'd abort a flight if he heard a noise that didn't sound right. The idea that he'd ignore hydraulic warnings and keep flying doesn't match the man I knew. She pulled up something on her laptop, turned the screen so Garrett could see. Maintenance records from Michael's Cessna Citation, dated 2 months before the crash. Hydraulic system service, manifold rebuild, performed by Baxter Components. Garrett felt ice water run down his spine. He clicked through the attached work orders, found what he was looking for in the parts list. Pressure relief valve, replaced during rebuild. Victoria's hands were shaking slightly as she gathered the documents back into order. Small tremors she tried to hide by keeping busy, but Garrett saw them anyway, recognized them as the physical manifestation of control starting to slip. I need you to investigate this properly, not the sanitized version that protects board liability. Real examination of every Baxter component we've installed over the past decade, every maintenance record, every crash and incident report. Ma'am, I'm a janitor. I don't have the authority. As of this morning, you're a senior maintenance consultant with full access to all Ashford aviation facilities and records. She pulled papers from her desk drawer, slid them across to him. Employment contract, official letterhead, legal language dense enough to require translation. Salary is $140,000 annually. Benefits include family health coverage comprehensive enough to handle your daughter's medical needs, insulin, pump supplies, everything. The number hit like a physical blow. Garrett had gotten used to living on $32,000 a year, gotten used to the constant calculation of what he could afford versus what Iris needed. $140,000 wasn't just life-changing, it was life-saving. You looked into my background. I look into everyone's background before I hire them, especially when they save $90 million of aircraft with 20 minutes and a toolbox. She pushed a pen across the desk toward him, but Garrett didn't pick it up. What happens if I find proof your husband's crash was caused by a Baxter defect? Victoria met his eyes directly. Then I take that proof to the FAA and deal with whatever consequences come. But I need to know the truth first. Need to understand what I'm dealing with before I start burning down everything my father built. The honesty was unexpected. Garrett had spent enough years being invisible around executives to know how rarely they admitted fear or uncertainty. Victoria Ashford was showing him the person underneath the CEO mask, vulnerable and scared, and trying to figure out how to do the right thing when the right thing might destroy everything. I'll need complete access. Baxter's facilities, installation records, interviews with their mechanics. No corporate handlers, no lawyers managing the conversation. Already arranged. Their facility manager is expecting you Thursday afternoon. I've made it clear that full cooperation isn't optional if they want to keep our contract. Garrett looked at the contract again, at the salary that would let him stop choosing between Iris's insulin and paying rent, at the health insurance that would cover her new pump, and the continuous glucose monitor upgrade her doctor had been recommending for 6 months. There's one condition. Victoria raised an eyebrow. I don't sign this until I've done enough work to know whether you're serious about finding truth or just want corporate damage control with a better title. If you're committed to fixing the real problem, I'll find it. But I won't put my name on something designed to protect the board instead of preventing the next crash. Something that might have been respect flickered across Victoria's face. She stood, extended her hand across the desk. Then we understand each other. Find the truth. I'll handle the politics. Her grip was firm, calloused in a way that surprised him. These weren't hands that just signed documents and attended galas. These were hands that had done actual work at some point. Back before success meant delegation and distance. One more thing. Victoria didn't release his hand. The media is calling you a hero. The board wants to capitalize on that momentum, get ahead of the safety narrative before it becomes a liability story. They're planning a press conference for Friday. You, me, the G800 pilot. Showing the world that Ashford Aviation takes safety seriously. I don't do press conferences. It's not a request. The board has already approved the budget. This is happening whether you participate or not. The only question is whether you help control the narrative or let them control it for you. The threat was delivered without malice, just corporate reality laid out in terms that didn't leave room for negotiation. Garrett understood the game even if he didn't want to play it. Friday, but I'm not reading prepared statements. If I talk, I tell the truth. That's all I'm asking for. The lie was smooth enough that Garrett almost didn't catch it. Victoria wanted truth, but only the kind that could be packaged and managed. Real truth. The kind that exposed decades of corruption. That was something else entirely. He took the consultant badge she offered but left the contract unsigned on her desk. The hallway outside felt different on the way out. Less intimidating now that he knew what Victoria was fighting against. Garrett pulled out his phone as he waited for the elevator, typed a message to Iris. Meeting went okay. Not in trouble. Home for dinner. How's the blood sugar? Her response came immediately. Perfect. Did you take the job? Not yet. Still thinking. Dad, she's offering you health insurance. Take the job. The elevator arrived. Garrett stepped in, smiled at his phone. Since when did you become the parent? Since you started being stubborn about good things. Love you. Don't mess this up. The words sat warm in his chest during the drive to Marcus Sullivan's grave. Lincoln Cemetery sprawled across 40 acres of Passaic County, old headstones dating back to the Civil War mixed with newer markers in granite and marble. Garrett had been here once for the funeral in 2007 and swore he'd never come back. Breaking that promise felt necessary now. Marcus Sullivan's grave sat under an oak tree, the headstone simple, name, rank, dates, and the words, "Faithful unto death." Someone had left flowers recently. His widow, probably. Julia Sullivan, who Garrett hadn't been able to face after the inquiry blamed him for her husband's death. He knelt in grass, still damp from morning dew, hand resting on stone that felt cold despite the October sun. "I'm sorry it took me 10 years, Marcus. Sorry I let them make you the cost of their cover-up. Sorry I wasn't strong enough to fight back when it mattered." The words came easier than he'd expected, like something that had been building pressure for a decade finally finding release. "But I'm going to make it right. Found the pattern you died warning them about. Baxter's still installing backwards valves, still killing people. And this time, I'm not letting them bury it." Footsteps approached through the grass. Garrett turned to find a woman in her 50s, dark hair threaded with gray, carrying fresh flowers that she probably meant to place on Marcus's grave. Julia Sullivan stopped when she saw him, recognition dawning slow, then fast. Garrett Holloway. Her voice carried no anger, which somehow made it worse. Garrett stood, ready to apologize and leave, but she stepped closer instead of backing away. "I saw you on the news, the Ashford plane. You saved all those people. Just did what any mechanic would have done." Marcus used to say the same thing. Just doing the job, like fixing death traps was ordinary work. She knelt, placed the flowers beside the headstone with the careful precision of someone who'd done this ritual 100 times. "The Air Force sent me a letter 3 years ago. Quiet, official, no publicity. Said they were reviewing Marcus's crash as part of a broader supplier audit. Asked if I wanted to participate in the inquiry." Garrett's chest tightened. "What did you tell them?" "That I wanted the truth, whatever it was." They sent the final report 6 months later. Hydraulic valve installed backwards. Supplier error, not maintenance oversight. Marcus's death was reclassified from pilot error to equipment failure. Why didn't they tell me? Because you'd been dishonorably discharged. The Air Force doesn't usually notify disgraced personnel when they're vindicated posthumously. She stood, met his eyes directly. "I never blamed you, Garrett." Marcus's last letter. He wrote it the night before the test flight. He mentioned concerns about the hydraulic rebuild. Said something felt wrong, but he couldn't identify the source. He trusted you to find it if anything went wrong. He knew you'd figure it out. The grief was sharp enough to make breathing difficult. I should have caught it before he took off. And the mechanic who installed it wrong should have checked orientation. And the supplier should have better quality control. And the Air Force should have switched vendors when the pattern emerged. There's enough blame to drown in, Garrett. I decided years ago to stop drowning. She pulled an envelope from her purse, handed it to him. I've been carrying this, hoping I'd run into you someday. It's Marcus's letter, the last one. I think you should have it. Garrett took the envelope with hands that wanted to shake. Thank you. Julia touched his arm, brief but warm. Whatever you're investigating at Ashford, whatever truth you're chasing, Marcus would be proud. Just don't let them destroy you the way they tried to before. She walked back toward the parking area, leaving Garrett alone with his partner's grave and a letter he wasn't sure he was ready to read. He opened it anyway. The handwriting was Marcus's. Messy, rushed, the script of someone writing thoughts as they arrived. Jules. If you're reading this, the test went bad. Don't let them tell you it was Holloway's fault. The hydraulics have been sketchy since the rebuild. I flagged it to procurement, but they said Baxter's QC cleared everything. Garrett's the best maintenance chief I've ever worked with. If something failed, it's because someone upstream cut corners. Make sure he knows I never doubted him. Take care of yourself. I love you. M. Garrett read it 3 times, then carefully refolded the paper and slipped it into his jacket pocket next to his heart. I won't let them do it again, Marcus. I promise. The cemetery was quiet except for wind in the oak leaves and distant traffic on Route 46. Garrett stood there until the sun dropped below the tree line, making promises to a dead friend and trying to figure out how to keep them without getting destroyed in the process. His phone buzzed at 7:15 p.m. Victoria. Can't sleep. Keep thinking about Michael's last flight. Can we talk? He should have declined, should have gone home to Iris and maintained professional boundaries, and not gotten personally involved in something that was already complicated enough. Instead, he found himself calling the number that had sent the text. Victoria answered on the first ring. I didn't think you'd actually call. Her voice sounded different over the phone. Smaller, less controlled. The CEO mask harder to maintain when it was just voices in darkness. You said you couldn't sleep. I know what that's like. How do you handle it? The insomnia? The memories? Garrett thought about nights sitting awake listening to Iris's glucose monitor, about the years when sleep felt like luxury he couldn't afford. I don't handle it well. Just learn to function without it. Victoria laughed, sharp and bitter. Functional insomnia. That should be a diagnosis. Probably already is in the DSM. Silence stretched between them, comfortable despite the strangeness of the situation. Can I tell you something I've never told anyone? Victoria's voice dropped lower. I was 8 months pregnant when Michael died. We'd picked out names, painted the nursery, made all the plans people make when they believe the future is guaranteed. I miscarried 3 days after the funeral. Stress-induced, the doctor said. Like my body decided if Michael wasn't here to be a father, there was no point in becoming a mother. Jesus, Victoria. I'm sorry. Everyone said the same thing at the time. Sorry for your loss. Sorry for your pain. Like apologies could fill the hole. Garrett understood that particular flavor of grief, the way it felt when condolences rang hollow because words couldn't touch the scope of what was missing. After Carolyn died, people kept telling me time would heal, like grief was a wound that just needed enough days to scab over. But it doesn't work that way. You don't heal from losing someone. You just learn to carry them differently. How long did it take to learn to carry it? 7 years and counting. Still figuring it out most days. Victoria's breathing changed, hitched slightly like she was crying and trying to hide it. I need to know if Michael died because someone installed a valve backwards and nobody cared enough to check. Need to know if I've been running the company that killed my husband and my child. We'll find out. Whatever the truth is, we'll find it. And if it destroys Ashford Aviation, then we build something better from the ashes. You sound very certain. I'm not certain about anything except that hiding from truth doesn't make it go away. Just makes it heavier. More silence. Garrett heard her moving, probably pacing her penthouse, the sound of expensive heels on expensive floors. My father built this company believing American engineering was superior because we valued precision and safety over cost-cutting. If that was a lie, if we've become the thing he despised, then I don't want to preserve his legacy. I want to correct it. That's brave. That's terrifying. Victoria corrected. But I'm tired of being afraid. The vulnerability in her admission made something shift in Garrett's chest, recognition of kindred damage. Get some sleep, Victoria. Tomorrow, we start finding answers. Tomorrow, she agreed. Thank you for calling back. Thank you for being honest. He ended the call and sat in his car outside his apartment building, phone warm in his hand, thinking about grief and truth, and the strange way broken people sometimes found each other in the wreckage. Inside, Iris was waiting on the couch, glucose monitor reading 102, homework spread across the coffee table. You were gone a long time. Had to visit someone living or someone dead. The question was casual but perceptive, the way Iris's questions usually were. Both, actually. She set down her pencil, gave him her full attention. Did it help? Yeah, baby. I think it did. Good. She returned to her homework. Because you've been carrying heavy things too long, and I'm too small to help you carry them, but maybe other people can. Garrett kissed the top of her head, breathed in strawberry shampoo, and the particular scent that meant his daughter was safe and healthy and more perceptive than any 11-year-old had a right to be. When did you get so wise? I had a good teacher. Your mom? Both of you. They ordered Chinese food because cooking felt impossible and fortune cookies felt appropriate. Garrett's fortune read, "The truth will set you free, but first it will make you uncomfortable." He kept it. Garrett woke Wednesday to 17 missed calls and a news van parked across from his apartment building. The second van arrived while he was making Iris's lunch. Camera crew setting up on the sidewalk like they were covering a presidential visit instead of stalking a janitor who'd fixed a plane. Dad, there are people outside with cameras. Iris stood at the window, monitor reading 94. Voice carrying more curiosity than concern. I know. Just ignore them. They're asking Mrs. Chen questions. She's telling them you're not home. God bless Mrs. Chen. Can I go tell them you're actually a secret superhero who saves planes in his spare time? Absolutely not. The first knock came at 6:47 a.m., too early for anything except emergencies or reporters who didn't understand boundaries. Garrett ignored it. The second knock was louder, more insistent, accompanied by a voice calling through the door. Mr. Holloway, Jonathan Torres, Channel 7 News. Just want to ask a few questions about Tuesday night. Still ignored. The third knock came with a business card slipped under the door. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, outlets that didn't usually care about aviation incidents unless they could weaponize them into larger narratives about corporate negligence or American decline. Garrett texted Victoria at 7:15. Media siege outside my building. Any way to make them go away? Her response came within seconds. On it. Don't engage. They're looking for sound bites that can be taken out of context. 10 minutes later, the news vans started leaving. Garrett watched through the window as they packed up equipment with obvious frustration, phones pressed to ears, probably being called off by editors who'd received phone calls from Ashford Aviation's legal department explaining liability and harassment in very specific terms. Mrs. Chen appeared at his door the moment the last van pulled away. Mr. Holloway, you okay? Those people were very rude, asking about your wife and your daughter and why you clean toilets if you're such a hero. I'm fine, Mrs. Chen. Thank you for not telling them anything. She waved a dismissive hand. I told them you were a wonderful tenant who minds his business and pays his rent on time, and if they had any more questions, they could talk to my lawyer. I don't have a lawyer, but they don't need to know that. Garrett smiled despite everything. You're the best. I know. She handed him a container. Dumplings. You look like you haven't eaten real food in days. After she left, Garrett found another item that had been slipped under his door while he was talking to Mrs. Chen. Plain white envelope, no return address, his name printed in block capitals. Inside was a single sheet of paper. 7 words in the same block capitals. Stop digging or your daughter pays. The threat was unsigned, unattributed, impossible to trace. But underneath the text was a photograph. Iris at school, walking from the main building to the playground, backpack over her shoulders, completely unaware she was being watched. Garrett's hands were shaking when he called Victoria. Someone just threatened Iris. She went from sleepy to alert in the space between syllables. What kind of threat? Anonymous note under my door. Says to stop digging or my daughter pays. Includes a photograph of her at school. Where are you right now? Home. Iris doesn't know about the note. She's getting ready for school. Don't let her go. I'm sending security. Give me your address. Garrett did. Victoria continued, voice sharp with controlled fury. Pack a bag. Enough for a few days. You're staying at my penthouse until we figure out who's threatening you. Victoria, I can't just. You can, and you will. Whoever sent that note has resources and no qualms about targeting children. I have security, cameras, a doorman who's ex-Secret Service. You'll be safer there than in an apartment with 1 lock and ground floor windows. The practical argument overrode Garrett's instinct to refuse help. Okay, but I need to tell Iris something. She's going to ask questions. Tell her the truth. That someone's trying to scare us away from investigating safety issues. That we're taking precautions. Kids are resilient when you're honest with them. She was right. Garrett had learned that after Caroline died, Iris handled truth better than platitudes. He found her in her room, packing her school backpack with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd been managing her own routine for years. Change of plans, baby. You're not going to school today. Her head came up fast, eyes wide. Am I sick? My blood sugar's fine. You're healthy. But we need to stay somewhere else for a few days. Somewhere safer. Safer than home? Garrett showed her the note, kept his voice calm and factual. Someone doesn't want me investigating the plane crash. They're trying to scare me by threatening you. So we're going to stay with Ms. Ashford until we figure out who's doing this. Iris read the note twice, her expression cycling through fear to anger to something that looked like determination. They took a picture of me at school without asking. Yeah, that's creepy and illegal. Very much both of those things. Are you going to stop investigating? Garrett knelt down to her level, eye to eye the way his grandmother had taught him. No, because if we stop, whoever's doing this wins. And people will keep dying in crashes that could have been prevented. I won't let that happen. But I need you to be brave and trust me to keep you safe. Can you do that? Iris nodded, chin set in the stubborn angle that was pure Caroline. Mom used to say brave people aren't the ones who don't get scared. They're the ones who get scared and do the thing anyway. The observation landed with enough weight to make Garrett's chest tight. Your mom was right. Then let's go be scared and do the thing anyway. Victoria's security arrived 20 minutes later. 2 professionals in dark suits who introduced themselves as Mitchell and Torres checked every room in the apartment with the methodical efficiency of people trained to find threats, then escorted Garrett and Iris to a black SUV with tinted windows that looked like it could survive a missile strike. The drive to Victoria's penthouse took 15 minutes through morning traffic. Iris spent most of it staring out the window, processing, her hand occasionally drifting to her pump to check settings in the unconscious way that meant she was anxious but managing it. Does Ms. Ashford know we're coming? She's the one who insisted. Garrett checked his phone for the third time. She's been texting me instructions since 6 this morning. Is she always this bossy? Pretty much. Iris smiled despite the circumstances. I think I like her. Victoria's building occupied prime real estate in downtown Newark, 40 stories of glass and steel with the kind of lobby that required security clearance just to approach the elevators. The doorman, ex-Secret Service according to Victoria, checked their IDs with the thorough attention of someone who took threats seriously, then escorted them personally to the penthouse level. Victoria met them at her door, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of her usual corporate armor, hair pulled back in a ponytail, looking more human than Garrett had seen her. "You're safe now. Come in." The penthouse was exactly what Garrett expected. Expansive, expensive, decorated with the kind of minimalism that only came from having enough money to afford emptiness. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of Manhattan across the river. The kitchen was larger than his entire apartment. But what caught his attention was the guest bedroom Victoria led them to. Already prepared with fresh linens, a basket of snacks on the dresser, and a small refrigerator stocked with juice boxes and glucose tablets. For Iris's diabetes management, Victoria said it like supplying medical necessities for threatened children was something she did every day. I had my assistant research continuous glucose monitors. Figured you'd need backup supplies. Iris's eyes went wide. You bought me backup supplies? Just in case. Can't have your blood sugar dropping while we're keeping you safe. Something shifted in Iris's expression, that particular look kids got when adults surprised them by actually caring. Thank you, Ms. Ashford. Call me Victoria. Ms. Ashford makes me sound like a principal. After Iris settled into the guest room with her tablet and headphones, Victoria led Garrett to the dining room where she'd spread documents across the table like evidence at a crime scene. I've been pulling files since 4 a.m., every board member's financial disclosures for the past decade, looking for connections to Baxter Components. Find anything? Victoria pulled up a spreadsheet on her laptop, highlighted entries in red. Richard Stone, my late husband's business partner. He's been receiving consulting fees from Baxter's parent corporation since 2008. $600,000 over 16 years, officially for aerospace industry analysis and market strategy consultation. What's it actually for? Making problems disappear. Convincing boards that safety recalls are too expensive. Protecting supplier relationships at any cost. She pulled up another document, email correspondence between Stone and Baxter's CEO from 2015. Richard, we need your help managing the Ashford quality control situation. Their maintenance director is pushing for fleet inspections that could expose installation inconsistencies. Can you apply board pressure to table the recommendation? Usual terms. Garrett felt rage building cold and purposeful in his chest. He's been on your board the entire time you've been CEO, 22 years total. Joined when my father was still running the company. Gave the eulogy at Michael's funeral. Her voice cracked on the last word. Garrett saw her hands curl into fists, saw the CEO mask slip entirely to reveal someone who'd been betrayed by people she'd trusted with everything. We take him down. Victoria looked up, tears on her face, but fire in her eyes. How? We prove he knew about the defect pattern before your husband died. We show he took money to suppress investigations. We make it impossible for the board to protect him. That requires evidence that might not exist. Then we create pressure. until someone gives it to us. Garrett pulled up the Baxter Components contact information on his phone. You said their facility manager is expecting me Thursday, 2 p.m. appointment. Move it to today. Tell them it's urgent, that the FAA is asking questions and we need answers immediately. People make mistakes when they're rushed and scared. Victoria was already typing. Done. They'll have you at noon. Garrett looked at the documents spread across the table, at the pattern of corruption that had been hiding in plain sight for nearly 2 decades. If we do this right, we don't just expose Stone. We burn down the entire system that made him possible. Good. Victoria's voice carried steel underneath the grief. My father taught me to build walls. You're teaching me to build bridges. But sometimes you need to burn down the walls before the bridges can matter. The observation landed with unexpected weight. Garrett met her eyes across the table, saw someone who'd spent 8 years being careful and strategic, and was finally ready to stop protecting the thing that had destroyed her. Your father would be proud of what you're about to do, or horrified. Hard to tell which. Both, probably. The best legacies usually are. Iris appeared in the doorway, holding her glucose monitor. Blood sugars 93. I'm going to have a snack. Victoria stood immediately. Kitchen's fully stocked. Help yourself to anything. Even the fancy cheese in the fridge? Especially the fancy cheese. Someone should eat it before it goes bad. After Iris disappeared into the kitchen, Victoria turned back to Garrett. She's remarkable. She's the reason I'm still alive. Garrett said it quietly. After Caroline died, I wanted to disappear, just stop existing. But Iris needed me, so I stayed. 7 years of staying because someone else needed me to. And now I'm staying because I want to. Because there's work that matters. Because you showed me walls can come down. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Victoria's phone buzzed, breaking the spell. Baxter confirmed your appointment. Noon. I'm coming with you. You don't have to, I know, but I want to see their faces. When you start asking questions, they don't want to answer. Baxter Components occupied an industrial park 40 minutes south in Elizabeth. All concrete and corrugated metal, and the particular aesthetic that said, we make things here, instead of, we impress people here. Dylan Kruger met them in the lobby with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, the kind of forced professionalism that came from receiving orders to cooperate while wanting to refuse. Mr. Holloway, Miss Ashford. Unexpected pleasure. I understood our meeting was scheduled for tomorrow. Change of plans. Garrett's voice carried the flat authority that came from 27 years in the military. The FAA has questions. We need answers today. Kruger's smile tightened. Of course. Happy to help however we can. He led them through security, past manufacturing floors where technicians assembled hydraulic components with practiced efficiency. The smell was familiar to Garrett. Cutting oil and metal shavings and the chemical tang of hydraulic fluid that got into everything. Your installation protocols, walk me through them. Kruger pulled up schematics in a conference room, his movements too controlled, too careful. Every component gets installed per manufacturer specifications. Torque wrenches calibrated to NIST standards. Post-installation pressure testing catches any errors before components ship. But errors still happen, occasionally. Human error is impossible to eliminate completely. That's why we have multiple verification steps. Garrett pulled up the photograph on his phone, the backwards valve from the G800. This valve was installed 3 weeks ago. Arrow pointing the wrong direction. Your post-installation testing should have caught it. Why didn't it? Kruger's professional mask slipped slightly. I'd need to review the specific work order. I have it here. Victoria slid documentation across the table. Valve installed September 28th. Work order signed off by your quality control supervisor. Post-installation testing marked complete and passed, but the valve was backwards, so either your testing doesn't work or someone falsified the documentation. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. I'm not at liberty to discuss internal quality procedures without corporate legal present. Then get them on the phone. Garrett leaned forward. Because we're not leaving until someone explains how a backwards valve got certified for installation in a $90 million aircraft. Kruger pulled out his phone, made a call that consisted mostly of tense listening and terse responses. When he hung up, his expression had shifted from defensive to calculating. Our legal team will be here in 30 minutes. You're welcome to wait, but I can't answer further questions without counsel present. We'll wait. Victoria's voice carried absolute certainty. And while we're waiting, we'd like to speak with the mechanic who installed the G800 manifold. Kruger's jaw tightened. I'm not sure that's appropriate without... His name is Marcus Jenkins. Garrett cut him off. He's on shift now, according to your employee directory. We can wait in the break room, or you can arrange a private space. Your choice. Kruger stood abruptly. Conference room B, 5 minutes. After he left, Victoria turned to Garrett. You're very good at this. 7 years of being invisible teaches you how to see through people who are hiding things. Marcus Jenkins entered the conference room looking wary. A man in his 50s with the hands of someone who'd been turning wrenches since before Garrett joined the Air Force. His eyes went to Victoria first, CEO recognition, then shifted to Garrett with the particular assessment mechanics gave each other, sizing up competence. Mr. Jenkins, thank you for speaking with us. Garrett kept his voice neutral. I'm trying to understand what happened with the G800 manifold installation. Not looking to blame anyone. Just need to understand the failure mode. Jenkins glanced at the door, confirming they were alone, then sat. I installed that manifold September 28th. Remember it because we had a rush order. Kruger was breathing down my neck about timing. Said if we missed the deadline, we'd lose the production bonus. He pulled a valve from his pocket, identical to the one Garrett had reversed on the runway. These valves are ambidextrous. Thread either way. Only indicator of correct orientation is this arrow stamped on the housing. But when you're installing it in the manifold, the arrow's facing away from you. Can't see it unless you take it back out and check. Did you check? Jenkins met his eyes directly. I did on the first manifold that day. Confirmed orientation, installed it, moved on. Second one, the G800. I assumed it was the same because they came from the same production lot. Didn't verify. He said it flatly, taking responsibility without excuses. That was my mistake. What about post-installation testing? Jenkins glanced at the door again, lowered his voice. Testing got abbreviated. We were behind schedule. Kruger said we could skip the full pressure cycle and just do static tests. Valve passed static because it wasn't under load. The backwards installation only shows up when you cycle the system under actual operating pressure. So Kruger authorized abbreviated testing to meet a deadline. He didn't put it in writing. But yeah, that's what happened. Victoria pulled out her laptop, typed something, turned the screen toward Jenkins. How many other manifolds shipped that day with abbreviated testing? Jenkins looked at the production log, his expression darkening. 4 total. All Ashford aviation orders. Garrett felt ice water run through his veins. 4 aircraft currently in service with potentially backwards valves. Jenkins nodded miserably. I flagged it to Kruger 2 weeks ago. Told him we should issue a recall, inspect all 4 aircraft. He said it would damage our relationship with Ashford, and I should keep my mouth shut if I valued my job. Victoria was already on her phone. I'm grounding all 4 aircraft immediately. We'll have maintenance teams inspect every valve tonight. She stepped out to make calls, leaving Garrett alone with Jenkins. Thank you for telling the truth. Jenkins shrugged. I've got grandkids. Can't sleep at night knowing I might have installed time bombs in planes they could end up flying on. The simple honesty was refreshing after years of corporate doublespeak. One more question. Has anyone from Ashford's board ever visited this facility? Jenkins thought for a moment. Yeah. Guy named Stone was here about a month ago. Didn't tour the floor, just met with Kruger in his office for a couple hours. Next day, Kruger started pushing even harder on production schedules. The final piece clicked into place. Victoria returned, her face pale but determined. All 4 aircraft grounded. FAA is issuing an emergency airworthiness directive. Every Ashford plane with Baxter hydraulics gets inspected within 72 hours. She looked at Jenkins. You're going to need to give a statement to FAA investigators. Are you willing to do that? If it means fixing this mess, yeah. You might lose your job. I might lose my grandkids if I don't speak up. That's not a choice. After Jenkins left, Garrett and Victoria sat in the conference room surrounded by evidence of systematic negligence. Stone knew. Victoria's voice was hollow. He was here a month ago. Probably told Kruger to rush the G800 job to meet our delivery schedule. We can't prove that with just Jenkins's testimony. No. But we can create enough pressure that someone breaks. Garrett pulled out his phone, showed her the threatening note photograph. Whoever sent this is scared. Scared people make mistakes. We keep pushing until they make one we can use. Victoria's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, her expression shifting from determined to shocked. It's the FAA. They want to schedule emergency depositions. You, me, and Kruger. Friday morning. She looked up. This is really happening. This is really happening. They drove back to Newark in silence, both processing the implications of what they'd uncovered. Garrett's phone rang as they crossed into the city limits. Unknown number, Colorado area code. He answered on speaker. Is this Garrett Holloway? Used to be aircraft maintenance chief, 412th Test Wing? The voice was older, rough with age and decades of cigarettes. Yes, sir. This is Colonel Walter Briggs. I was your commanding officer back in 2005 through 2007. I've been watching the news. Saw what you did with that Ashford jet. Garrett's hand tightened on his phone. Colonel Briggs was a name he hadn't heard in 10 years. A voice connected to memories he'd been actively avoiding. Sir, I'm not sure what you're looking for, but if this is about the inquiry, shut up and listen, Holloway. The command in Briggs's voice was automatic, irresistible. I'm calling because I owe you an apology. What happened with Sullivan's crash, the way that inquiry got handled, that was wrong. I knew it was wrong at the time, but I let it happen anyway because I was protecting my pension and my career, and I've been carrying that guilt for 10 years. The admission came out in a rush, like something rehearsed but never spoken. The C-130 that went down, Sullivan's bird, had a hydraulic defect I knew about. Same supplier as Ashford's using now, same pattern of installation errors. I flagged it to procurement. They said it would cost too much to switch vendors. Then Sullivan died, and instead of admitting we'd been flying aircraft with known defects, We blamed you. Garrett pulled the car over, hands shaking too badly to drive safely. Why are you telling me this now? Because you're about to walk into another cover-up, and I don't want to see them do to you what they did before. Victoria Ashford seems like she wants the truth, but her board is going to fight you. They're going to try to make this about individual mechanic errors instead of systemic corruption. Briggs coughed, the sound wet and painful. I've got stage 4 lung cancer. Doctors gave me 6 months back in January. I'm spending what time I have left making things right. I have files from the Sullivan investigation, documentation showing the pattern of defects going back to 2005, email chains proving Stone knew about the problems before your partner died. How did you get access to all this? Still have friends in procurement. People who've been watching Stone operate for years and never had ammunition to take him down. You fixed that G800 on live television and made it impossible to ignore. Now we finish what you started. Garrett looked at Victoria, saw his own shock reflected in her expression. What do you need from me? I'm flying to Newark Friday morning, early. We'll meet before your press conference. I'll give you everything I have, maintenance reports, financial records, testimony from other mechanics who got scapegoated the same way you did. Enough evidence to bury Stone and everyone who protected him. Sir, why wait until Friday? Because I'm dying and it takes me a while to pack. Plus, I want to see Stone's face when the truth comes out. Call it a dying man's last request. The line went dead before Garrett could respond. Victoria broke the silence. Did that just happen? Your board member has been taking bribes for nearly 20 years. My old commanding officer has proof. And he's flying here Friday to hand it over right before we announce a fleet grounding that's going to cost your company $20 million. She started laughing, sharp and slightly unhinged. My father always said the truth would set you free. He never mentioned it would bankrupt you first. They made it back to the penthouse to find Iris in the kitchen, teaching Victoria's housekeeper how to calculate insulin doses while making cookies. The domestic normalcy was jarring after the day's revelations. Dad, we made snickerdoodles. Mrs. Reyes said the recipe is her grandmother's. That's great, baby. Iris took one look at his face and her smile faded. What happened? We found out the bad things go deeper than we thought. But we also found someone who can help us fix them. Is it going to be dangerous? Probably. Iris processed this with the same matter-of-fact acceptance she applied to managing her diabetes. Okay, but you're still going to keep us safe, right? Always. Then I'm not scared. She handed him a cookie, warm from the oven, and went back to teaching Mrs. Reyes about carb counting and insulin-to-carb ratios and all the mathematics of staying alive. Victoria appeared beside him, voice low. She's extraordinary. She's the reason I know how to be brave. Garrett took a bite of cookie. Every day I watch her manage something that could kill her if she makes one mistake, and she does it without complaining, without giving up. If she can do that, I can face down corporate corruption. That night, after Iris was asleep in the guest room and Mrs. Reyes had gone home, Garrett found Victoria on the penthouse balcony overlooking the city. She'd changed into comfortable clothes, hair down, the CEO mask completely abandoned. Can't sleep? She shook her head. Keep thinking about tomorrow. The FAA deposition. The press conference. Stone's face when Briggs hands over evidence that destroys him. Scared? Terrified? Good. Fear means you're taking this seriously. Victoria turned to face him, close enough that he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. What if we're wrong? What if the evidence isn't as damning as Briggs thinks? What if the board finds a way to spin this into my incompetence instead of their corruption? Then we deal with it. But we don't stop. We don't back down. Because even if we lose everything, at least we'll know we tried. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. Garrett stepped closer. It's the hardest thing either of us will ever do. But it's right. And sometimes right is all that matters. She kissed him then, sudden and fierce, like someone grabbing onto hope with both hands. Garrett kissed back, hands in her hair, feeling something unlock in his chest that had been frozen for 7 years. When they pulled apart, Victoria was crying. I didn't think I'd ever feel safe enough to do that again. Neither did I. They stood together on the balcony, watching Newark's lights blur into Manhattan's glow. Two broken people who'd found each other in the wreckage and were building something new from the pieces. Inside, Iris's glucose monitor beeped at steady rhythm, counting out the night in careful increments. Outside, the city breathed and moved and continued forward. And somewhere in Colorado, Colonel Walter Briggs packed files that would change everything. The FAA investigator arrived at Ashford Aviation Headquarters Thursday morning with the expression of someone who'd already decided guilt and was just collecting evidence to confirm it. Sandra Chen was younger than her voice had suggested on the phone, maybe 40, with a particular brand of intensity that came from years of enforcing regulations nobody wanted to follow. Garrett met her in the same conference room where he'd reviewed Baxter's failures 2 days earlier. Victoria sat at the head of the table looking like she'd slept maybe 3 hours total. The circles under her eyes were the kind expensive concealer couldn't quite hide. Chen didn't waste time on pleasantries. She opened her laptop, pulled up files that made Garrett's chest tight just looking at the thumbnails. Mr. Holloway, walk me through exactly what you found on the G800, every detail. Then explain why a janitor knew how to diagnose a hydraulic failure that Ashford's entire engineering team missed. The skepticism in her voice was professional, the tone of someone who'd heard too many convenient explanations that fell apart under scrutiny. I spent 27 years maintaining military aircraft, C-100s primarily, some C-17s work. Hydraulic systems were my specialty. When I heard the pilot symptoms, stuck landing gear, non-responsive backup system, I knew it was either a manifold failure or valve orientation problem. And you just happen to have the exact tools needed to access the G800's hydraulic bay? I keep my tools in my car, have for 7 years. Never convinced myself to throw them away. Why not? If you'd been working as a janitor since 2010, why maintain a full aircraft maintenance toolkit? The question sat in the air like an accusation waiting for confession, because throwing away tools felt like admitting I'd never use them again, and I wasn't ready to admit that. Chen's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted slightly. Skepticism giving way to recognition of human behavior that didn't make logical sense, but made perfect emotional sense. Tell me about your discharge from the Air Force. Records show it was changed from honorable to dishonorable in 2007. Why? There it was. The question Garrett had been dreading since Chen walked in. My partner died during a test flight. C-130 out of Ramstein Air Base. The inquiry board blamed me for missing a maintenance defect during pre-flight inspection. Said I'd been negligent, failed to catch a hydraulic valve installed incorrectly. Was it installed incorrectly? Yes, but I wasn't the one who installed it. The inquiry board knew that. They blamed me anyway because admitting the Air Force had been using a supplier with systemic quality problems would have cost more than sacrificing one maintenance chief. Chen pulled up another file, this one showing Air Force maintenance records Garrett hadn't seen in a decade. Marcus Sullivan, your partner. Official cause of death was catastrophic hydraulic failure leading to loss of aircraft control. She looked up from the screen. Same failure mode as the G800 incident. Exactly the same. Pressure relief valve installed backwards. System bled pressure under load. Landing gear failed to deploy. Except Sullivan was doing high-speed maneuvers when it happened. He didn't have time to diagnose before he hit the ground. The memory was sharp enough to draw blood even after 10 years. Victoria spoke for the first time since Chen arrived. The supplier was Baxter Components. Same company we've been using since 2008. Chen's eyes narrowed. You're telling me the FAA certified a supplier in 2008 that had already killed an Air Force test pilot in 2007? They certified Baxter because the Air Force investigation concluded it was maintenance error, not supplier defect. All quality control documentation passed inspection. The backwards valve installation looked like an isolated incident instead of a systemic pattern, which is exactly what Ashford's board tried to do with the G800 incident. Chen closed her laptop with a click that sounded like a gavel. Until Mr. Holloway fixed it on live television and made it impossible to sweep under the corporate rug, Garrett said nothing. Chen stood, gathered her materials with efficient movements. I'm issuing an emergency airworthiness directive. All Ashford aircraft with Baxter hydraulic components are grounded effective immediately pending inspection. All valves will be verified for correct orientation. Any aircraft with backwards installations get pulled from service until manifolds can be properly rebuilt. Victoria's face had gone pale, but her voice stayed steady. That's 43 aircraft, the entire fleet except for legacy models that still use our original supplier. Then I suggest you start inspecting quickly. You have 72 hours before I start issuing fines for every aircraft not in compliance. Chen moved toward the door, stopped, looked back at Garrett. Mr. Holloway, I'll need your full deposition regarding the Air Force investigation. If what you're saying is accurate, if Baxter Components has been installing defective parts for 17 years while we blame dead pilots and scapegoat mechanics, then we have a much bigger problem than just Ashford Aviation. She left without waiting for response. The conference room fell silent except for HVAC systems and distant phone calls being made in adjacent offices. Victoria stared at the closed door like it might offer some explanation for how her Thursday morning had just turned into an existential crisis for her entire company. 43 aircraft, $3 million per inspection minimum, plus revenue loss from grounding during peak season. The board is going to lose their minds. Garrett was already thinking through logistics, mechanics needed, timeline for rebuilds, coordination required to prevent creating new safety issues in the rush to fix old ones. You'll need experienced hydraulic techs, people who know what they're looking at, not just technicians following checklists. I can help coordinate. Victoria laughed, sharp and bitter. Help coordinate. You just cost my company $20 million, and you're offering to help manage the disaster response. I cost your company nothing. Baxter Components cost you. Your board cost you when they buried quality control reports. I just made it impossible to keep hiding the bill. The truth settled between them like debris after an explosion. Victoria's phone was already buzzing with what were probably urgent calls from board members demanding explanations. She ignored it. eyes locked on Garrett with an intensity that felt like she was trying to see through him into whatever made him different from everyone else who would have taken the money and stayed quiet. "Why are you doing this? You could have signed my contract, taken the salary, kept your head down while we managed this quietly. Instead, you're turning it into a federal investigation that might destroy the company." Garrett thought about Marcus Sullivan screaming in a cockpit, about Caroline dying 3 years after the inquiry destroyed his career, about Iris managing diabetes at 11 while news vans camped outside their building. "I get to sleep at night knowing I didn't let it happen again. That's what I get." Victoria's phone kept buzzing. She finally answered, her voice shifting immediately into CEO mode. "Yes, I'm aware of the FAA directive. No, I won't be firing Mr. Holloway, because he's right and you're wrong. I don't care what Stone thinks. We're doing this my way, or I walk." She ended the call, looked at Garrett with something that might have been respect or might have been fear. "The board is demanding an emergency meeting. They want me to announce your termination and frame this as isolated mechanic error at Baxter. What are you going to tell them? That I'm choosing truth over their comfort. And if they don't like it, they can find a new CEO." "That's brave. That's terrifying." Victoria's mask slipped enough to show the person underneath. "But I'm done being controlled by men who value their stock options more than human lives." Garrett's phone buzzed. Unknown number, local area code. He answered to find Iris's school principal on the line, voice tight with professional courtesy that barely masked alarm. "Mr. Holloway, I'm calling because there's been an incident. A man came to the school this morning asking questions about Iris. Said he was a reporter doing a story on your heroism. Our security escorted him off campus, but I thought you should know." "What did he look like?" 60s, well-dressed, drove a black Mercedes. Wouldn't provide press credentials when asked. "Did he approach any students?" "No. But he did take photographs of the playground from the parking lot before leaving." Garrett felt rage building cold and purposeful. "Thank you for calling. Iris won't be returning to school until this situation is resolved. Of course, let us know if you need anything." He ended the call to find Victoria already standing, grabbing her jacket. What happened? Someone stalking Iris's school, taking photographs, claiming to be press. Victoria pulled out her phone, made a call that got answered on the first ring. "Mitchell, I need you at PS 147 in Newark. Full security sweep. Someone's been surveilling the property. I don't care if they left. Find out who they are and what they wanted." "Yes, immediately." She turned to Garrett. "Iris is at the penthouse with Mrs. Reyes?" "Yeah, good. She stays there until we identify who's threatening her. This is escalating, because we're getting close to something they can't afford to have exposed." Victoria's laptop chimed with an incoming email. She opened it, her face going white as she read. "What is it?" Email from Richard Stone. Subject line, "Reconsider your position." She turned the screen so Garrett could see. The message was brief, clinical, threatening without making explicit threats. "Victoria, I understand you're under stress given recent events. Perhaps you should consider taking a leave of absence to focus on personal matters. The board has expressed concern about your judgment. I'd hate to see you make decisions that damage your father's legacy irreparably. Some things, once said, cannot be unsaid. Some investigations, once begun, cannot be stopped without consequences. Think carefully about what you're willing to sacrifice." Richard Garrett read it twice. He's threatening you. He's threatening both of us. Victoria's hands were shaking slightly. "Richard knows where I live, knows my schedule. He was Michael's best friend for 20 years. He has access to everything. Then we move up the timeline. Friday's too far away. We can't. Briggs doesn't arrive until tomorrow morning. We need his evidence before we go public. Victoria's phone rang again. She glanced at the screen, her expression shifting from anger to confusion. It's my father's lawyer. He's been dead for 6 years. Why would his estate attorney be calling? She answered on speaker. This is Victoria Ashford. The voice on the other end was elderly, formal, carrying the weight of information long held secret. Ms. Ashford, this is Jonathan Blackwell. I handled your father's estate planning. I'm calling because certain conditions have been met that trigger disclosure of sealed documents your father left in my care. What kind of documents? Letters, financial records, video testimony recorded 3 weeks before his death. He was very specific about the circumstances under which these materials should be released. What circumstances? If Richard Stone were ever investigated for corruption, or if Ashford Aviation faced federal inquiry regarding safety violations. Both conditions have now been met. My father knew. He suspected. Had private investigators looking into anomalies he noticed in board financial disclosures. Never found definitive proof before his death, but he wanted insurance in case his suspicions proved correct. Victoria sat down heavily. What's in the files? Evidence suggesting Stone has been receiving payments from multiple suppliers over 2 decades. Your father documented patterns he found concerning but couldn't prove. He also left you a video message explaining why he never confronted Stone directly. Can you send everything? I can deliver them personally. I'm in New York. I can be at your office within 2 hours. My penthouse instead. I'll text you the address. After she ended the call, Victoria and Garrett sat in silence processing this new development. Your father was investigating Stone before he died. And never told me because he didn't want to destroy my relationship with Michael's best friend without proof. Maybe he didn't have proof because Stone was better at hiding it back then. Or because my father died before he could finish investigating. Victoria's face went pale. Dad had a heart attack, sudden, unexpected. He was 63 and healthy. Garrett felt ice water in his veins. When did he die? June 2018. 2 months after Stone joined Baxter's board of directors. The implication hung in the air between them, too terrible to speak aloud. Victoria's phone buzzed. Text from Mitchell, her security chief. Found the man from the school. License plate traces to a rental car paid for by RJS Capital Partners. That's Stone's company. He's not even trying to hide it. Victoria showed Garrett the message, her hands shaking with rage. He's threatening my daughter to intimidate you. And he might have killed my father to protect his corruption. We don't know that for certain. No. But we're going to find out. Garrett's phone rang. Iris, video call from the penthouse. He answered to find his daughter's face on screen. Glucose monitor visible over her shoulder reading 89. Dad, Mrs. Reyes said, I can't go outside. She said there are bad people looking for me. Is that true? The fear in her voice made Garrett's chest tight. It's true, but you're safe where you are. Victoria has the best security in the city watching over you. When can I come home? Soon, baby. We're fixing the problem. Iris's lower lip trembled slightly, but she didn't cry. Mom used to say when things get scary, you have to be scared and brave at the same time. So, I'm doing that. You're doing perfect. Dad? Yeah? I love you. And I think you're doing the right thing, even though it's hard. I love you too, sweetheart. More than anything. After the call ended, Garrett sat with his phone in his hands, thinking about threats and corruption and all the ways powerful people tried to control outcomes by targeting the vulnerable. Victoria was on her own phone, voice cold and controlled. Yes, I want full security sweeps of the penthouse. Every entrance, every camera, every access point. And I want a detail on Iris 24/7 until this is over. I don't care what it costs. She ended the call, looked at Garrett with determination that had hardened past fear into something sharper. Stone made a mistake. He threatened a child. That's the kind of thing that turns allies into enemies and makes people who were on the fence choose sides. You're going to use this. I'm going to destroy him with it. By the time we're done, Richard Stone won't have enough friends left to fill a phone booth. Her phone chimed again. Email from Jonathan Blackwell. I'm in your lobby. Security won't let me up without your authorization. Victoria authorized his access, then turned to Garrett. Whatever's in my father's files, it changes everything. Are you ready? Garrett thought about Marcus Sullivan's last letter. About Caroline's voice in his memory saying the truth always mattered. About Iris being brave and scared at the same time. Yeah, I'm ready. Jonathan Blackwell looked like he'd been practicing law since the Constitution was ratified. Elderly, impeccably dressed, carrying a leather briefcase that had probably seen half a century of sensitive documents. Victoria led him to the dining room, where he opened the briefcase with the careful reverence of someone handling historical artifacts. Your father was meticulous about documentation. He began this investigation in 2017 after noticing irregularities in quarterly financial reports. He hired private investigators, reviewed years of board member activities, and compiled everything you see here. He spread files across the table. Photographs, bank statements, email printouts, private investigator reports spanning hundreds of pages. The video message is on this thumb drive. He recorded it 3 weeks before his death. I've never watched it. Your father specified that only you should see it first. Victoria took the thumb drive with hands that trembled slightly. Did he tell you what he suspected? Only that he believed someone on the board was compromising safety for financial gain. He couldn't prove it definitively, but wanted you to have this information if the situation ever became critical. It's critical now. After Blackwell left, Victoria and Garrett sat in silence, looking at the evidence spread before them. Finally, she plugged the thumb drive into her laptop, clicked the video file. The image showed her father, Alexander Ashford, looking older and more tired than Garrett remembered from photographs. He sat in what looked like a home office, speaking directly to the camera with the careful precision of someone who knew this might be his only chance to be heard. Victoria, if you're watching this, it means my worst suspicions were correct and Richard Stone has been corrupting the company I built. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Sorry I didn't act sooner. Sorry I didn't have enough proof to confront him while I was alive. But I want you to know what I found, and I want you to know I believe in you to do what I couldn't. The video was 18 minutes long. Alexander Ashford walked through years of suspicious payments, traced shell companies, identified patterns of board voting that protected Baxter components despite recurring safety concerns. I don't know if Richard has crossed the line into criminal activity, but I know he's compromised. I know he's putting profit over safety. And I know that if something isn't done, people will die. You're stronger than I am, Victoria. Braver. Don't let him destroy what we built. Don't let corporate politics outweigh human lives. The video ended with Alexander Ashford looking directly at the camera, directly at his daughter. I'm proud of you. Whatever you decide to do with this information, know that I'm proud of you. And know that sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing. Love you always, Dad. Victoria was crying by the time the video finished, tears running unchecked down her face. Garrett wanted to comfort her but understood some grief needed space. Finally she spoke, voice raw. He knew, and he died before he could stop it. Or he died because he was getting too close to stopping it. You think Stone killed my father? I think your father started investigating in 2017. Stone joined Baxter's board in early 2018. Your father died in June 2018. That's a suspicious timeline. We can't prove it. No. But we can make sure it was the last person he ever hurt. Victoria wiped her eyes, clicked through files on the laptop with renewed focus. Dad documented 17 years of payments from Baxter to Stone's shell companies, over $2 million total. He also found evidence Stone pressured other board members to approve supplier contracts despite safety concerns. She pulled up an email chain from 2015, Stone to 3 board members. We need unanimous approval on the Baxter contract renewal. I don't care about maintenance director concerns. We can't afford to switch suppliers mid-production. Anyone who votes against renewal will find their compensation package under review. Extortion and bribery. The FAA is going to have a field day with this. The SEC, too. Stone used his board position to enrich himself while compromising safety. That's securities fraud, wire fraud, probably half a dozen other federal crimes. Garrett's phone buzzed. Text from Colonel Briggs. Landed early. Newark Liberty. Can meet tonight instead of tomorrow morning if you want the files faster. I'm not getting any healthier. He showed Victoria the message. Tell him, yes, let's end this tonight. They met Colonel Briggs at a diner in Newark at 8 p.m., a place that looked like it had been serving coffee and regret since the 1950s. Briggs looked worse than his voice had suggested on the phone. Oxygen cannula in his nose, portable concentrator humming beside his booth, shoulders that had probably been broad once reduced to angles wrapped in his old Air Force jacket. Holloway. His voice still carried command despite the cancer eating through him. Sir, this is Victoria Ashford. Briggs sized her up with the assessment of someone who'd spent decades evaluating people under pressure. You're younger than your father was when I met him. Got his eyes, though, and his spine, from what I hear. You knew my father? Met him once at an aerospace industry conference in 2016. He cornered me after my panel, asked pointed questions about supplier oversight and military quality control. Smart man. Asked the kind of questions that meant he already knew the answers and was testing whether I'd be honest. What did you tell him? The truth. That military procurement was compromised by contractors who prioritized profit over safety. That the system protected suppliers by scapegoating mechanics and pilots. That it had been happening for decades and showed no signs of stopping. Briggs pulled a thumb drive from his pocket, set it on the table between them. Everything's on here. Maintenance reports from Sullivan's crash showing the defect pattern. Email chains between Stone and Baxter leadership going back to 2006. Financial records proving Stone received payments to suppress safety investigations across multiple contractors. And testimony from 3 other mechanics who got blamed for crashes caused by Baxter defects. How did you get access to all this? Still have friends in procurement and contracting. People who've been documenting Stone's activities for years, but never had the political capital to take him down. You fixed that G800 on live television and made this fight winnable. He pushed the thumb drive toward Garrett. Use it wisely. Stone has resources and no qualms about destroying people who threaten him, but he's also arrogant, thinks he's untouchable. That's his weakness. Briggs started coughing, deep and wet, the kind that sounded like it hurt even from outside his body. Victoria grabbed water, pushed it toward him. He drank, recovered, smiled without humor. Stage 4 lung cancer. 40 years of cigarettes catching up. Doctors gave me 2 months max. I plan to spend it watching Richard Stone go to prison. Garrett took the thumb drive. Thank you, sir, for this, for finally telling the truth. Thank you for giving me the chance to make it right before I die. Victoria pulled out her laptop, plugged in the thumb drive, started scanning files. Her expression darkened with each document she opened. This is comprehensive. Stone knew about Baxter's defects before my husband died, before Marcus Sullivan died. He took money to keep it quiet, and people died because of his silence. 17 people over 15 years. Briggs's voice was flat. I have the names, the dates, the crash reports. All of it blamed on pilot error or mechanic negligence when the real cause was always the same. Baxter Components installing valves backwards and Stone making sure nobody looked too closely. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Briggs met Garrett's eyes directly. Because I'm a coward. Because I valued my pension more than justice. Because I told myself that one dead pilot wasn't worth destroying my career over. And then it was 2 pilots. Then 5. Then 10. And I kept telling myself it was too late to make a difference. His hands shook as he reached for his coffee. But you fixed that plane on live TV, and I realized it's never too late. Not until you're dead. And I'm not dead yet. What changed? Why now? Briggs pulled out his phone, showed them a photograph of a young woman in Air Force pilot uniform, my granddaughter, 23 years old, just got her wings. She's flying C-100s out of Ramstein. Same aircraft that killed Sullivan. Same supplier providing parts. He put the phone away. I couldn't live with myself if she died because I stayed silent. So here I am, dying old man trying to burn down the corruption before I run out of time. Victoria was still scrolling through files, her face getting paler with each revelation. Stone received payments from Baxter even after my husband's crash, even after he gave the eulogy at Michael's funeral. He took money while I grieved. She looked up, and Garrett saw something in her expression that went beyond rage into territory that was colder and more dangerous. I'm going to destroy him. Not just his career. Everything. His reputation, his wealth, his freedom. I want him to lose everything the way he took everything from me. Careful. Briggs's voice carried warning. Revenge is satisfying, but justice is what actually changes systems. Focus on making sure this never happens again, not on making Stone suffer. Suffering happens automatically when men like him lose power. Victoria nodded, but Garrett could see the rage still burning underneath professional control. They spent 2 hours going through every file Briggs had brought. Email chains showing Stone coordinating cover-ups across multiple contractors, financial records proving systematic bribery, testimony from mechanics who'd been blamed for crashes they didn't cause. By the time they finished, Garrett felt like he'd been carrying concrete. The weight of 17 deaths, 17 families destroyed by greed and negligence, 17 lives that could have been saved if someone with power had cared more about truth than profit. The press conference is tomorrow at noon. Briggs was gathering his things, movements slow and careful. I want to be there when you announce this. Want to see Stone's face when he realizes his world is ending. You might not make it past security. Garrett tried to keep his voice gentle. Ashford's board controls access to press events. Briggs smiled, sharp and predatory, despite the oxygen cannula. I'm a decorated colonel with 30 years of service and documentation of federal crimes. Let them try to keep me out. After Briggs left, Victoria and Garrett sat in the diner nursing cold coffee and trying to process what they'd learned. Tomorrow changes everything. Victoria's voice was quiet. The board will try to fire me. Stone will lawyer up. The FAA will probably expand their investigation to every aircraft Baxter has ever touched. We're looking at years of litigation. You having second thoughts? No, but I'm scared. Scared of losing the company. Scared of what this will cost. Scared that doing the right thing means destroying everything my father built. Your father wanted you to do this. You heard the video. He was proud of you before you had even made the choice. Victoria reached across the table, took Garrett's hand. I couldn't do this without you. You know that, right? We're doing it together. That's what makes it possible. They drove back to the penthouse in silence, both carrying the weight of tomorrow's revelations. Inside, Mrs. Reyes had left a note saying Iris was asleep, blood sugar stable at 107. Garrett checked on his daughter, found her curled under blankets in the guest room, glucose monitor glowing softly on the nightstand. He adjusted the blanket, kissed her forehead, whispered the same words he'd said every night since Caroline died. I love you. You're safe. I'm here. Victoria was waiting when he emerged, standing at the windows overlooking the city. I can't stop thinking about what my father said, that the hardest thing and the right thing are usually the same thing. He was right. I know, but knowing something intellectually and having the courage to act on it are different things. Garrett moved to stand beside her. You've already shown the courage. Everything since Tuesday has been you choosing truth over comfort. Tomorrow is just making it official. She turned to face him, close enough that he could see the fear underneath her determination. What if we lose? What if Stone finds a way to spin this, to make us look like the problem instead of him? Then, at least we tried. At least we didn't stay silent while people died. That's not very comforting. No, but it's honest. Victoria kissed him then, slower than the first time, with the particular intensity that came from knowing tomorrow might change everything. When they pulled apart, she was crying again. I'm falling in love with you, and it terrifies me. I'm already in love with you. Has been since you chose truth over your board. They stood together at the window, watching the city lights blur through tears neither of them tried to hide, holding each other like shipwreck survivors who'd found land and weren't sure it would hold their weight. Tomorrow they would burn down the system that had killed Marcus Sullivan and Michael Ashford and 17 others. Tonight they held each other and pretended the fear wasn't overwhelming. Outside, Newark breathed and moved and continued forward. Inside, Iris slept peacefully, glucose monitor counting out steady numbers. And somewhere in a hotel room near the airport, Colonel Briggs sat reviewing files one last time, making sure he had enough evidence to bury Richard Stone so deep he'd never see sunlight again. The darkness before dawn was always the hardest. But dawn was coming whether they were ready or not. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday. Same day of the week, Marcus Sullivan died. Garrett held it in hands that no longer shook, standing in an office that used to terrify him, surrounded by people who now called him Sir instead of janitor. Official notice, Lieutenant Colonel Garrett Holloway, honorable discharge. Reinstated, Back pay, $247,000, effective immediately. 6 months felt like 6 years when you were rebuilding everything from scratch. The Holloway Safety Academy had graduated its first class 2 weeks ago. 23 students who'd come in as janitors and warehouse workers and grocery store clerks and left as certified aircraft maintenance technicians. Garrett stood in Hangar 7 at Newark Liberty, watching a young woman named Maria Torres torque down the final bolt on a manifold rebuild with exactly the right pressure, no shortcuts, no assumptions. Iris appeared beside him, carrying 2 coffee cups from the break room. 13 now, taller, her insulin pump upgraded to the latest model that linked directly to her glucose monitor and calculated dosages automatically. Ashford's health insurance had covered the $20,000 cost without question. They're doing good, Dad. That manifold rebuild is textbook perfect. Garrett took the coffee, watched Maria work with the kind of methodical precision that came from understanding what was at stake. Your mom would have liked this, watching people get second chances. She would have liked Victoria, too. Iris sipped her coffee. Are you going to ask her to move in or keep pretending you don't spend every weekend at her place? The observation came with the particular tone teenagers deployed when they'd figured out adult secrets and enjoyed watching their parents squirm. It's complicated. It's not. You love her. She loves you. Iris set down her cup. I already told her she could share my bathroom if she needs to. For when she stays over officially instead of sneaking out at 6 a.m. like I don't notice. Victoria appeared in the hangar entrance as if summoned by conversation, wearing jeans and an Ashford aviation polo instead of the corporate armor she'd lived in for 2 decades. The board had tried to force her out 3 more times before finally accepting she wasn't leaving. Stock price had recovered after the FAA audit came back clean, and contracts started flowing from companies that wanted to work with aviation firms that prioritized safety over profit. She crossed to them, kissed Garrett like it was the most natural thing in the world, hugged Iris with the easy affection that had developed over months of family dinners and movie nights and the slow building of trust. Colonel Briggs died this morning. His daughter called. Wanted us to know he went peacefully. The news sat heavy, despite being expected. Briggs had made it 4 months past his doctor's predictions, long enough to see Richard Stone indicted on 17 counts of negligent homicide and numerous federal corruption charges. Long enough to see the aviation industry implement new quality control standards that carried Marcus Sullivan's name. He did good work at the end, made things right. Victoria nodded, her hand finding Garrett's and holding tight. The funeral's Thursday in Colorado Springs. Military honors. His daughter asked if you'd speak. Garrett thought about the old man who'd carried guilt for 10 years and spent his last months making sure the truth couldn't be buried again. Yeah, I'll speak. They stood together watching the mechanics work. 3 people who'd been broken by systems that valued profit over humanity and had somehow found each other in the wreckage. The hangar smelled like hydraulic fluid and possibility, the particular combination of past and future that came from understanding where you'd been well enough to know where you needed to go. Iris's glucose monitor beeped. She checked it, smiled. 108. Perfect range. I'm going to grab lunch with Maria and the crew. You two should probably talk about living arrangements or whatever adults do when they're in love, but scared to admit it. She walked away before either of them could respond. 13 years old and carrying wisdom that had come from managing life and death every day since she was 6. Victoria leaned against Garrett's shoulder, the gesture comfortable in ways that still surprised him sometimes. She's right, you know, about us being scared. Garrett smiled, quoted the words he'd written on a lunchbox note years ago. Fear is just another instrument, though. You don't ignore it, you fly through it. Victoria turned to face him, her expression serious in the way that meant she'd made a decision. Move in with me. Both of you. The penthouse is too big for one person, and Iris deserves a bedroom that isn't next to the apartment building's trash chute. What about your board? They already think I'm a distraction. The board works for me now. And you're not a distraction. You're the reason I remember why this company exists. To build things that keep people safe. Everything else is just noise. Garrett kissed her, long and slow. The kind of kiss that said yes to futures he'd stopped believing in 7 years ago. When they pulled apart, Iris was watching from across the hangar with a smile that looked exactly like Caroline's. The sun was setting over Newark, painting the sky in oranges and purples that made industrial New Jersey look almost beautiful. Garrett's toolbox sat open on the workbench, every tool in its place, ready for whatever needed fixing next. His phone buzzed. Text from the Air Force Personnel Center. Lieutenant Colonel Holloway, your official reinstatement is complete. Discharge reversed to honorable. Back pay processed. $247,000. Welcome back to the family. He showed it to Victoria, who read it and smiled. Does this mean I have to salute you now? Only if you want to. They walked out of the hangar together, Iris running ahead to the car, talking about college plans and becoming an aerospace engineer, and maybe fixing the systems that had tried to kill her father before she was born. Thursday morning, they flew to Colorado Springs for Colonel Briggs's funeral. Military honors, flag-draped coffin, 21-gun salute that echoed across the cemetery and made Iris jump despite knowing it was coming. Garrett stood at the podium in his dress uniform, the first time he'd worn it since his discharge was overturned, looking out at a crowd of 200 people who'd come to honor a man who'd spent his last months making things right. Colonel Walter Briggs taught me that redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about making sure the future is different. His voice carried across the cemetery, steady despite the emotion underneath. He carried guilt for 10 years. Could have taken it to his grave. Instead, he chose to fight. Chose to hand over evidence that exposed corruption he'd helped protect. Chose courage over comfort in his final months. Garrett looked at Julia Sullivan sitting in the front row, Marcus's widow, who'd come to honor the man who finally cleared her husband's name. Because of Colonel Briggs, 17 families now know the truth about how their loved ones died. Because of him, the aviation industry is implementing safety standards that will save lives for decades to come. Because of him, mechanics who were blamed for crashes they didn't cause have been vindicated. He paused, looking at the flag-draped coffin. The colonel told me once that the hardest battles aren't fought with weapons. They're fought with truth. And sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is admit they were wrong and spend their last breath making it right. After the service, Briggs's daughter approached Garrett and Victoria, holding a small wooden box. Dad wanted you to have this. She opened it to reveal 3 medals: Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Air Force Commendation Medal, and a letter addressed to Iris. He said your daughter was the bravest kid he'd ever met. Wanted her to have these as a reminder that courage comes in many forms. Garrett took the box with hands that trembled slightly. Thank you. She'll treasure them. That evening they flew back to Newark. Iris sat between Garrett and Victoria on the plane, the metal box in her lap, reading Briggs's letter for the third time. He says I remind him of his granddaughter. Says brave people are the ones who get scared and do the thing anyway. She looked up at Garrett. That's what Mom used to say. Your mom and the Colonel were both right. Iris set down the letter, her expression thoughtful. Dad, do you think Mom would be proud of what you did? Fixing all those planes and making the bad people face consequences? Garrett thought about Caroline's voice in his memory, about the letter he still carried in his wallet, about all the ways grief changed shape over 7 years. Yeah, baby. I think she'd be proud. Good. Iris returned to the letter, satisfied, because I'm proud of you, and Victoria's proud of you, and Colonel Briggs was proud of you. So if everybody who matters is proud, then you should probably be proud of yourself too. The wisdom of it made Garrett's chest tight. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You're just finally paying attention. A month after the funeral, Garrett stood in the Ashford Aviation boardroom presenting the annual safety report to a board that looked very different from the one that had tried to fire Victoria 6 months ago. Richard Stone's seat was empty, the man himself awaiting trial in federal detention. 3 other board members had resigned under pressure once their own financial relationships with suppliers came under scrutiny. The new board listened with the kind of attention that came from watching a federal investigation dismantle their predecessors. 0 crashes, 0 injuries, 97% reduction in maintenance-related safety incidents. Garrett clicked through slides showing the impact of new quality control protocols. The Holloway Academy has trained 63 new mechanics in 6 months. Every graduate certified in hydraulic systems and taught to prioritize safety over speed. We've created a culture where people feel empowered to report concerns without fear of retaliation. He pulled up the final slide. Most importantly, we've rebuilt trust with the FAA and our customers. Airlines are choosing Ashford Aviation because they know we value lives over profits. That's a legacy worth protecting. The board applauded. Victoria smiled at him from her seat at the head of the table, pride evident in her expression. After the meeting, they walked out together. Garrett still not quite comfortable in the Director of Safety title that came with an office 3 doors down from Victoria's. You were brilliant in there. I just presented facts. You presented facts in a way that made them understand why those facts matter. That's a gift. They took the elevator down to the lobby, where Iris waited with Mrs. Reyes, having come straight from school to meet them for dinner. How'd it go? Perfect. Victoria kissed Garrett, then turned to Iris. Ready for dinner? I'm thinking that Italian place you like. The one with the giant meatballs? That's the one. They walked out into November evening air. 3 people who'd been strangers 6 months ago and were now something that felt like family. That night, after Iris was asleep in her new bedroom in Victoria's penthouse, their penthouse now, officially, the moving trucks having completed the transition 3 weeks earlier, Garrett found Victoria on the balcony overlooking the city. Can't sleep? She shook her head. Too much thinking. About what? About how different everything is from 6 months ago. About how close I came to losing everything that actually matters. Victoria turned to face him. If you hadn't walked into that hangar that night, if you hadn't been brave enough to speak up, if you'd just stayed invisible like you'd been doing for 7 years, everything would be different. Maybe. Or maybe someone else would have found the pattern eventually. But they didn't. You did. She took his hands. You saved 200 lives on that plane. Then you saved 17 families by giving them truth about how their loved ones died. Then you saved my company by forcing us to face our corruption. And somehow, in the middle of all that, you saved me. I didn't save anyone, just did what needed doing. There you go again, downplaying the heroism. I'm not a hero, Victoria. I'm just a mechanic who got tired of hiding. You're a father who taught his daughter courage by example, a friend who honored his dead partner by clearing his name, a man who chose truth when lies would have been easier. She kissed him softly. And you're the person I want to spend the rest of my life with, if that's something you might be interested in. The proposal was characteristically Victoria, direct, practical, wrapped in vulnerability she was still learning to show. Garrett pulled her close. Yeah, that's something I'm very interested in. They stood together watching Newark's lights blur into Manhattan's glow, two broken people who'd built something whole from the pieces. Inside, Iris's glucose monitor beeped its steady rhythm. The apartment smelled like the dinner they'd shared, like home and safety, and the particular comfort that came from knowing you were exactly where you belonged. Somewhere in Colorado, Julia Sullivan was probably sitting at her kitchen table, reading the letter Garrett had finally sent her. The one explaining how her husband's death had led to changes that would save countless others. Somewhere in federal detention, Richard Stone was learning that money couldn't buy freedom once the truth came out. Somewhere in an Air Force hangar in Germany, Colonel Briggs's granddaughter was performing maintenance checks on a C-130, using protocols named after Marcus Sullivan. And here, on a balcony in Newark, Garrett Holloway held the woman he loved and thought about how 7 years of grief had somehow led to this moment. The future stretched ahead like runway lights in darkness, guiding them toward destinations they couldn't see yet, but trusted were there. 2 weeks before Christmas, Garrett took Iris back to his old apartment to pick up the last few boxes they'd left behind. The building looked smaller than he remembered, the hallways darker, the whole place carrying the weight of years he'd spent being invisible. "Dad, this is weird." Iris stood in the empty living room where they'd eaten pizza and watched movies and managed diabetes through hundreds of careful nights. "What's weird? Being here again. It feels like a museum of our old life." "Yeah, it does." Garrett found the shoebox under Iris's old bed, the one containing 1,124 lunch notes he'd written over 7 years. She'd kept every single one. "Can I keep these?" "Of course. They're yours." Iris opened the box, pulled out notes at random, reading words he'd written in darkness and hope and determination to give his daughter something to hold on to. "You are braver than you believe. Courage is just fear that prayed. The truth will set you free. Fear is just another instrument." She looked up at him, tears in her eyes. "These saved my life, you know. Every day at lunch, reading your words, remembering I wasn't alone even when I felt alone." "Baby, no, listen." Iris's voice was firm. "When Mom died, I was so scared. Scared you'd leave too. Scared the diabetes would kill me. Scared everything would fall apart. But every day there was a note. Every single day. And I knew that if you were strong enough to write them, I was strong enough to read them." Garrett knelt down, pulled his daughter into a hug that felt like letting go of one chapter and embracing the next. "You're the strongest person I know. I learned from the best." On Christmas morning, Garrett woke in Victoria's penthouse to the sound of Iris's laughter from the kitchen. He found her teaching Victoria how to make his mother's recipe for cinnamon rolls, both of them covered in flour, the kitchen looking like a disaster zone. "We're making breakfast." Iris announced it with the kind of pride that came from successfully managing a complex recipe while calculating carbohydrates and insulin doses. I can see that. Victoria smiled, looking more relaxed than he'd ever seen her. Your daughter is a tyrant in the kitchen. Very exacting standards. That's because Dad taught me if you're going to do something, do it right. They ate cinnamon rolls at the dining table that had once been covered with evidence of corruption and was now just a place where a family shared meals. Iris's glucose monitor read 112. The Christmas tree Victoria had insisted on getting stood in the corner, decorated with ornaments that mixed her expensive collection with homemade ones Iris had crafted. Presents were modest. Garrett had insisted on nothing extravagant. Books for Iris, a new watch for Victoria, a framed photograph for Garrett showing the three of them at Holloway Academy's first graduation. But the real gift was simpler. Just being together. Just being safe. Just being a family that had chosen each other from wreckage and built something that felt like home. After breakfast, Victoria's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, her expression shifting. It's the FAA director. On Christmas morning, she answered, listened for a long moment, her face cycling through surprise to something that looked like vindication. Thank you for calling. Yes, please send the documentation. I'll make sure Garrett receives a copy. Merry Christmas to you too. She ended the call, looked at Garrett and Iris with tears in her eyes. Richard Stone pleaded guilty this morning. All charges, 17 counts of negligent homicide, securities fraud, bribery, conspiracy. He's going to prison for 25 years minimum. The news settled over them like snow, quiet and transformative. It's over. Garrett said it quietly, testing the weight of the words. Yeah, it's over. Iris raised her orange juice glass. To Colonel Briggs, for being brave enough to tell the truth. They clinked glasses, orange juice and coffee, and the particular satisfaction that came from seeing justice finally prevail. That night, after Iris was asleep, Garrett and Victoria stood on the balcony watching the city glitter with Christmas lights. Next year will be different. How so? Next year, we'll have Christmas in our house, not a penthouse, not an apartment. An actual house with a yard where Iris can have a dog and we can host academy graduations and build something permanent. You've been thinking about this. Victoria smiled. I've been thinking about a lot of things. About marriage, about maybe expanding our family, about what the next chapter looks like for us. And what does it look like? She turned to face him. It looks like you teaching mechanics and me running a company that actually cares about safety. It looks like Iris growing up knowing she's loved by two parents who chose each other and chose her. It looks like building a legacy that's about more than money or power or corporate success. Sounds perfect. It sounds terrifying. But the best things usually are. Garrett pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the steady rhythm of her heartbeat against his chest. Victoria pulled back to look at him. Did you just quote Julia Sullivan's speech? It was a good speech. It was. But I think I like your version better. What's my version? That some revolutions start with whispers. Others start with wrenches. The best ones start with a father who refused to stay broken and a daughter who taught him how to heal. Caroline would have liked you. The observation came out quiet, unexpected. Yeah? Yeah. She always said the best people were the ones who chose courage over comfort. You're one of those people. So are you. They stood together as the city celebrated Christmas, as snow began to fall in soft flakes that caught the light and transformed Newark into something almost magical. Inside, Iris slept peacefully, glucose monitor counting steady numbers, Dreams full of futures where she'd become an aerospace engineer and fix the systems her father had helped expose. Garrett Holloway was 59 years old, director of safety at a company he'd once mopped floors for, father to a daughter who taught him daily about courage, partner to a woman who'd chosen truth over empire and somehow found both. The ghosts didn't leave. Marcus Sullivan and Caroline still lived in his memory, still shaped his choices, still reminded him what happened when you looked away from hard truths. But they'd changed what they said. Instead of accusations and guilt, now they whispered permission. Permission to live again, to love again, to believe that redemption was possible if you were willing to do the work. He drove home with his family beside him, past the airport where everything had started, toward the future they were building together, one honest day at a time. 3 years later. The ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Ashford Aviation Safety Academy drew a smaller crowd than Victoria's old product launches, but every face in the audience mattered. Former mechanics who'd been silenced by NDAs, families of pilots who hadn't made it home, whistleblowers who'd risked everything to tell the truth. Iris Holloway stood at the podium in her MIT hoodie, 17 years old and already holding 2 aerospace engineering patents. Her continuous glucose monitor beeped softly under her sleeve as she spoke about the hydraulic system redesign that would become industry standard within the year. My dad taught me that fixing broken things isn't just about wrenches and schematics, she said, her voice steady. It's about having the courage to admit when something's wrong, even when admitting it costs you everything. In the front row, Garrett reached for Victoria's hand. She wore a simple gold band now instead of the Cartier diamonds from her corporate days. He wore a matching one. They'd gotten married at the courthouse 6 months after the FAA settlement, with Iris as their only witness and Marcus Sullivan's daughter Julia standing in as best man. Ashford Aviation's stock had never recovered to its pre-scandal heights. The board had forced Victoria out within a year, but the company she'd built from the ashes, Ashford Sullivan Safety Systems, had government contracts in 14 countries and a zero-tolerance policy that made headlines for refusing to compromise on a single bolt. Richard Stone was serving 8 years in federal prison for criminal negligence and obstruction of justice. His lawyers were still filing appeals. The families of the pilots who died in those unexplained crashes had finally gotten their answers and their settlements. The ghosts were quieter now. Marcus Sullivan and Caroline Holloway had become something gentler in Garrett's mind. Not accusations, but guides. Reminders that the people we lose stay with us not as weights, but as witnesses to how we choose to live after they're gone. That evening, back in the house with the yard where Iris's rescue dog was destroying the garden, Garrett found Victoria in her study reviewing safety reports. "You know you don't have to work on Christmas Eve," he said. She looked up, reading glasses perched on her nose, and smiled. "Old habits. Besides, someone needs to make sure the new hydraulic manifolds pass certification before the January rollout." Iris would say you're being obsessive. Iris is currently teaching the dog to fetch her insulin supplies. I don't think she has room to judge. He crossed to her desk, pulled her to her feet, and kissed her the way he'd been doing for 3 years, like someone who'd forgotten what joy felt like and was still amazed to have found it again. "Merry Christmas, Victoria Ashford Holloway." "Merry Christmas, Garrett." Through the window, snow was falling over Newark, transforming the airport runways in the distance into ribbons of white light. Somewhere out there, planes were landing safely because engineers had done their jobs right, because whistleblowers had found the courage to speak, Because a janitor had remembered who he used to be, and a CEO had chosen truth over empire. The wrench that fixed a plane could fix a world if the hand holding it refused to let go. And sometimes, if you were very fortunate, it could build something better than what had broken in the first place. Not a perfect ending, but an honest one. And that, they'd learned, was worth more than all the champagne towers and corporate galas in the world.